Lovely introduction, Tom. I've really enjoyed the opportunity to meet so many of you over the last couple of years. Even though I spent 33 years working in the federal government, this has been my first opportunity to attend a GITEC conference. I've really enjoyed the opportunity of meeting all of you over the last couple of days. And now I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our next esteemed speaker, Ann Duncan, the CIO of the Department of Energy. She was recently named one of the top government tech leaders to watch in 2023. And with critical infrastructure playing such an important role in the national cyber security strategy, I imagine we'll be watching her also in 2024. In her role as CIO, Ann manages the department's IT portfolio and modernization, oversees the department's cybersecurity efforts, and leads technology innovation and digital transformation. She served in the Obama administration as the CIO of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Prior to that, Ann served as Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer of Dell Technologies, Chief Information Officer for the County of Santa Clara, California, and Chief Technology Officer at Palo Alto Unified School District, and has held various leadership roles at Hewlett-Packard, and is a published author, most recently of the book Industrial Digital Transformation. She received the 2022 Capital CIO Large Enterprise Orby Award. She's been given a range of previous awards, including DC's Top 50 Women in Technology for 2015 and 2016, Computer World's Premier 100 Technology Leaders for 2016, State Scoop's Top 50 Women in Technology list for 2017, FedScoop's Golden Gov Exec of the Year in 2016 and 2021, and FedScoop's Best Bosses in Federal IT in 2022. Please join me in welcoming Ann to the stage.
Wow, that was quite a list that you just came up with. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Morning. It's honored to be here and kick off the second day of the 2023 GITEC conference. I'm going to try and move this a little bit so I can get a little closer to my notes here. Hang on a second. Okay. So it's great to be here in Annapolis for this conference. And I'm always thrilled to see people gathered in person. We're still doing some events virtually, and it's just not the same to be up on, be on a video as opposed to being on stage in a room. So yes, a couple days ago, I got a message that said, check your title. And so I went down, I looked at the title. I'm like, there's no title for my talk. Oh, they wanted me to check my own title. Okay. So the talk is titled A Visionary Keynote, which is asking a lot, I think, for 9 o'clock on Tuesday morning. But we'll try. So I know this week, you've been talking about topics like digital transformation, quantum, AI, and emerging technologies. And we're certainly grappling with understanding our evolving roles as government technologists and how to best leverage our resources to meet the needs of the American people. At DOE, my team and I are considering the same questions. Since joining the department 2 years ago, and by the way, I can't believe it's been 2 years. It seems like, it was just a few days ago that I came to DOE. I've worked to foster a greater sense of cooperation across DOE. And in that, I've had great partners as well. So we are at a time in DOE, we're in an SA and Office of Science and the labs, and everybody seems to be prepared to work together much more effectively than is sometimes the case at DOE. So using that cooperation, we've been trying to ensure we have the buy-in across DOE to advance IT modernization and cybersecurity efforts. In fact, my team this year, when we were working on updating our strategic plan, added collaboration as a key pillar around which we organize our work. So that moves in alongside service delivery, cybersecurity, and digital transformation. And based on what I've seen and heard recently, that we are far from the only folks who recognize collaboration is a really important part of our role as CIOs and IT leaders. So I should have some slides. Yeah, good. What do you know? I got slides. I might even manage to remember to tell you to change those slides. So when we go to the, do I have a clicker here? Is this actually work for? Let's see. No, I don't think so, but nope. I'll let you do that. All right. So if you can go to the next slide, that'd be super. Okay. So, so while it's central to all of our effectiveness as digital technologists, placing an explicit focus on collaboration really helps us tell a more complete story about our work, and it holds us accountable. So on that note, I'd like to share with you today that I'm going to focus on how collaboration works hand in hand with cybersecurity. You'll see that pairing clearly demonstrated at DOE through our cyber resilience work, our cybersecurity strategy more broadly, our zero trust journey, and our workforce development efforts. So let's see, why don't we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so I want to talk a little bit first about cyber resilience. So a major ongoing collaborative project is in the works in my office, and this is to convene experts across the DOE ecosystem. And in that way, we share leading research and capabilities and ensure that DOE knows what DOE knows. And we are also able to leverage partnerships as opportunities arise. So just last month, my office hosted the DOE Cyber Resilience R&D Symposium to launch an internal U.S. government DOE Cyber Resilience Research and Development Capabilities Catalog. And through this exercise, we gained a deeper perspective to the breadth of cyber resilience underway at DOE national laboratories. And the purpose of the symposium was to orient federal government stakeholders with the national laboratories and their efforts in cyber defense and resilience research and development, to improve operational awareness of the broad range of cyber activities being conducted by the labs, and to identify opportunities for parts of DOE and other agencies within the federal government to leveraging our ongoing R&D and further R&D to address critical needs. We also spent time discussing the National Cybersecurity Strategy and how cyber research and development contribute to the goals outlined in the strategy. But one of the main goals we wanted to achieve was to foster discussion and collaboration between federal government, national laboratories, and other R&D entities with a focus on the priorities of our national cyber strategy. So what we find is that we have 17 national labs, which I'll talk a little bit about later. And folks often work in silos within those labs. And so one of our goals was to actually bring those folks together so that they could exchange research and ideas. And so we did that. We not only launched the catalog, which included over 110 research projects across DOE and cybersecurity, and that is available within the U.S. government at this point. Sorry for those of you outside the government. We're trying to get it releasable outside the U.S. government as well. But it pinpointed projects that people can leverage, that people can share. And also that includes just the stuff that is even releasable within USG. There are things people didn't want released or that were at the classified level. So that just gives you some idea of some of the research coming out of DOE labs. So from all accounts, it was very successful. We had many people come to us and say, no one has actually ever done this. We've never brought researchers from across the labs together. And so as part of our role as CIO in convening people, we feel like part of our role is to convene across DOE to share that knowledge, because part of IT is information management. And so we want to make sure that that is shared. And the highlight, I think, of the event was 9 labs collaborating on a live demonstration of hacking one of our own wind turbines. Thankfully, since it was our own wind turbine, they did not do it destructively, but we watched them live take over this wind turbine. So it was both fascinating and scary. So that's one example of how we have leveraged collaboration across DOE. I also want to recognize that in addition, government and industry each have an important role to play as collaborative partners. We must seek opportunities to learn together. Partnering is a whole of nation approach to develop, deploy, and secure our digital ecosystem. And the speed of innovation and technology requires us to work together to deliver services to the American people. So cross-sector collaboration is incredibly important to me. And I think it's important to most of my colleagues. Prior to my current role, as we mentioned, I was at EPA. My background is an engineer, and I've worked in technology roles in both private and public sector, as well as state and local government. So my background really leads me to believe that cooperation between the sectors is important, that we don't have all the answers in the government, we don't have all the answers in industry, and we have to work together to be more successful and to solve our problems that are increasingly complex. So that's why I really couldn't be more pleased that I'm seeing the administration implement that mindset across the federal interagency when it comes to cybersecurity and the path forward to future capabilities. And we need to continue this process to confront our rapidly evolving threat landscape. So I want to pivot a little bit and go to the next slide. And the problem is I can't see where we are. One more, I'm sorry. So sorry, I skipped that slide while I was talking. So I only sort of can get the slides right, apparently. So I want to pivot and talk about how we secure our network systems, critical infrastructure, and data, and how that works with innovation, collaboration, and adaptation to meet today's growing needs. And in that context, I want to talk about, first of all, cybersecurity and modernizing our digital ecosystem is a top priority of the administration. Everybody knows, I don't have to tell you about EO 14028. Even I finally learned that number. I'm like, I don't know EOs, and this one even I learned. So May 2021, like the Friday before I started. So the Friday before I started my job, the Colonial Pipeline was hacked. The Monday after I started my job, I think the EO came out. I'm like, well, this is going to be really fun. Okay, sure. But that EO makes a significant contribution towards modernizing cybersecurity defenses by protecting federal networks, improving information sharing between the U.S. government and the private sector on cyber issues, and strengthening our ability to respond to incidents when they occur. They also, I will add, created a lot more compliance exercises. And we need to be careful as we go through this that we continue to focus on risk-based approaches to cybersecurity and not get bogged down in compliance. So next slide, please. I'm in sync with the slides now. So, this March, President Biden announced a new national cybersecurity strategy, and that advances a collective defense approach in which the United States, its allies and partners, together with industry and the critical infrastructure sectors, will advance our digital ecosystems, making it defensible, resilient, and aligned with our values. So, I want to highlight a couple things, and I'm going completely off the script that I have, but that's okay. I want to highlight a couple things, and one is that the most important thing to me about this national cyber strategy, other than the fact that some members of my staff wrote 2 of the 5 foundational papers, so we are deeply invested in this strategy, is that it places the responsibility for solving cyber problems on those who are most capable. We are trying to shift the burden from individuals and small businesses to government and large industry. And I think that's hugely important because it's harder and harder for individuals and small businesses to protect themselves. We need to take that burden off them and make it easier. And that's part of the concept of collective defense. So with that, I will get back to the remarks I was supposed to be presenting you. So the strategy emphasizes sector risk management agencies, of which DOE is one, and that our job is to have day-to-day responsibility for security and resilience of our sectors, and that we need to invest in those sectors and invest in our partnership with those sectors. And as I said, we're rebalancing that responsibility to those most capable and able to reduce risks. And DOE, with its tremendous cybersecurity resources, capabilities, and expertise, is well positioned to be a leader in this effort. We not only work with the energy sector, but we run part of the energy sector with our with the power marketing administrations, which provide power in 33 states. And we sell bulk power we maintain the grid in 33 states and we sell bulk power to the public. So that means we must be able to model that for the rest of the country. So we're also realigning long-term incentives by striking a careful balance between defending ourselves against urgent threats and simultaneously strategically planning and investing in a resilient future. I know that we have crucial opportunities right now across the enterprise that we can seize together and playing our proper role in contributing to the strategy's goals and objectives. So the National Cyber Strategy is going to have an implementation plan. We look forward to that release, and we are going to also focuses aggressively on defending critical infrastructure. In addition to that sector risk management agency focus, it speaks to innovation and a shift in thinking from being reactive to proactive to resilience by design, and incentivizing the adoption of secure software development practices to ensure security by design, as well as the need to work with our national partners in this space. And DOE, through our national labs, has developed capabilities around secure applications by design. And that's something that is available. We are pushing it out to industry. It's available to the federal government as well. Techniques, tools, and processes to secure by design. So this strategy will not only help the federal government, but also the private sector to shift their mindset. And this is what's truly important. It's going to set a tone. It does set a tone for considering cybersecurity risks up front, as opposed to responding after a breach. And it also continues to set the concept that Chris English speaks of frequently, or spoke of frequently, although I don't think Chris is going to disappear just because he retired. He's already joined Jan Easterly's board of collective defense. We all have a role, and we all need to work together. We used to say in the past, right, oh yeah, if my defenses are better than the people, down the street, then they'll go down the street. And we can't operate like that, because weakness for one of us, a breach for one of us, can impact all of us. And so we need to work together to collectively defend our assets. So federal CIO, Claire Martirana, refers to cybersecurity as the great enabler of IT modernization. As she points out, when we help agencies launch technology that is secure by design, they're able to drive transformation across products and services to improve the digital experience and maximize investments. So let's move on here a little bit. I want to talk about the ecosystem at DOE. And I want to point out that DOE has labs, plants, and sites all over the country. There are 93, I believe it is, and that says it, but I can't read it from here. I believe it's 93 or 97 plants and sites across the country in 27 states. So it's a huge ecosystem. The weird, if you wonder about the weird collection of locations, that's driven by the Manhattan Project. Everyone knows what the Manhattan Project is, right? Yeah. So those sites were chosen very intentionally to be away from population centers, and they still are, for the most part, away from population centers. And we have some sites, Nevada nuclear site and Idaho National Lab, that are as big as some other states. So next slide. One more slide. Oh, I'm sorry. You were just, yeah, sorry. Okay, so this one I just want to mention speaks to the diversity of those labs. And that's what's, when you look at security, one of the challenges is that everybody's got a different mission set. And across DOE, we have everything from open science labs all the way to national security labs. And we have single purpose labs that simply run accelerators, linear accelerators, and do basic research on their accelerators. And then we have labs like PNNL that do anything you could possibly imagine happens at PNNL. I walked into a lab at Pacific Northwest National Lab, and it was a fish lab. I'm like, why are we doing fish research at the Department of Energy? Well, we have dams. We don't have dams, but other people have dams, and those generate power. And we're interested in making sure the fish can actually survive the experience of us having dams on the river, so we still have salmon. So that's why we do research on fish. But it's just fascinating, the breadth of the ecosystem, and you could do this for a lot of departments and agencies across the federal government. So that context, I think, is important as we look at how we tackle cybersecurity. and how we shift. And I mentioned earlier a risk-based approach and moving away from a compliance to a risk-based mindset. What I saw at the end of the Obama administration before I left the federal government was we were starting to shift to a risk-based approach. And I've worried that with so many mandates now that we are going to move back away from that risk-based approach more to compliance because no one has enough resources. Anyone here have enough resources for cybersecurity? Okay, just checking, because if you did, I was going to come talk to you. We really have to focus on what's likely to happen, what's going to have the highest impact, and tackle those issues. And so we have to provide quantitative, data-driven cybersecurity risk assessments. We need good methodologies and processes to drive risk-informed leadership so that we can, in fact, have a risk level appropriate for each one of those plants, sites, and labs. Everything from Berkeley, who works with people in around the world, including countries that we don't consider our allies, not even our frenemies, they're beyond the frenemies list, to labs like Sandia, where you have to have a top secret clearance, or a Q clearance as we call it at DOE, basically to get on the site. So there's a huge variety of experiences, and we have to be able to design security for in any of those. And so we've built community of practice across DOE to help us implement these activities and implement and meet our objectives and talk to each other about how we're going to get to that risk-based approach across this complex environment where in fact we share a network, right? So we've got this complex environment. We got Berkeley letting people from all sorts of places on the network, and Sandia not wanting anyone on the network. And how do we share this network together? So those are the kind of things we have to figure out with a risk-based approach. We also are very focused on supply chain security, and we have instituted a supply chain risk management program. Actually, we have many supply chain risk management programs at DOE, to tell the truth. And so one of the things that we are trying to do with our supply chain risk management programs at DOE is not consolidate them, but rationalize them so that we are not all studying the same thing over and over again, but that we are sharing our research and our learning. And if we could figure out how to do that at DOE, maybe we can figure out how to expand that and share across the federal government. But we are also now in that same vein attacking software bill of materials. And if anyone has a good answer to that problem, let us know. So that may continue. The data complexity of software bill of materials is massive. And so that's something that we are going to have to resolve. So as part of our process for working on this, we're updating our cybersecurity strategy across DOE, where we'll lay out what we need to do and continue to do, whether that's new activities or continuing to ensure enterprise-wide success. And it does emphasize that cybersecurity is a team sport, that we must collaborate across DOE with a sustained focus, persistence, and practice to be successful. So I'm going to get a little more specific if I have the next slide. We're going to talk a little bit about zero trust because everybody has to talk about zero trust. In fact, I think I was asked this morning to talk about zero trust, so I should talk about zero trust. DOE is a complex enterprise. We have a wide-reaching mission. It spans, as I said, open science, nuclear security, and we lead federal efforts to enhance the reliability, security, and resilience of the nation's energy, economic, and environmental infrastructure. It's hugely important to everybody in this room that the grid in those 33 states that we run stays up and running every single day, that those nuclear power plants that we assist people with stay online, that we lead the clean power transition. So all those things need to go forward. So we have no doubt, and I think this is true across the federal government, but I think it's especially true in DOE. We have some of the brightest minds in the world dedicated to breakthrough achievements in areas such as high performance computing, particle accelerators, crowdsourced research, and the effective generation of management and power. And none of this can happen without a secure, robust, and resilient infrastructure. So my office is leading the implementation of zero trust at DOE. And there's lots of progress, many positive outcomes, but lots to do. When we were at our cyber resilience conference, there was a great discussion about the fact that some vendors, I'm not picking on anyone who might be in this room. So they're trying to sell them ZTA in a box. Here, we've got all your answers for ZTA. Here it is right here in the box. We have not seen anything that looks like ZTA in a box. I don't think anyone will see anything that looks like ZTA in a box. But implementing zero trust depends on a successfully deploying comprehensive automation and orchestration. So we need common guidance across our enterprise. You may have noticed DOE is very diverse. In fact, for those of you who remember Bob Brees, Bob told me when I took this job, he said, oh, the one thing you need to know is the unofficial motto of DOE is you're not the boss of me. Which may be true across the government, but it's especially true at DOE. So we provide common guidance across the organization. We have many plans and many implementations of ZTA. And part of that is because, as we pointed out, we have many different missions across DOE. And so we want to be aligned, we want to learn from each other, but we know that we are not going to have one answer. So we developed a zero trust working group that meets biweekly to share lessons learned across the enterprise. And we have pillar leads for across the enterprise for the CIS's 5 ZTA pillars. Identify identity, device, network, environment, application workload, and data. So we have people leading in each of those areas from across the organization. They're not all from my office. And then we've been able to measure our current maturity across DOE and develop implementation plans. And we have made sure that my office leads by example. So we were the first one to put out an implementation plan, which we use as a model for the rest of the organization. And this includes that we defined what those maturity levels were and provide a model for evaluating through assessments. We created a maturity score formula for the enterprise, and we developed a technical roadmap for the enterprise. So we now have plans from every component. I think we got 97 plans from DOE for zero trust. So if you need, if you need any models, we get 97 of them. The last one we had to pull some teeth to get. I won't tell you who that is. It was funny, but we will not share that and shame anyone in this large group. But one of them took a while. We've conducted some tabletop exercises across the organization to foster that cross-pillar collaboration and learning so that we can make sure that people aren't operating in silos. The 2 exercises so far have been on the identity pillar and the data pillar. And folks from across the organization work through scenarios to try and identify how to best implement and move forward in their organization. We're also working with the interagency. And so we're on the Internet of Things community of practice. We're helping lead that and we're developing guidance through that on zero trust principles for industrial control systems. So in a perfect world, we would all have the budgets and resources to ensure all our devices are compatible and playing nicely with one another. And as I said, such a platform approach is not really feasible right now. We are able to provide solutions across the organization that are going to meet our individual needs, but there's no one product that will meet all of our needs across DOE. So we're integrating technology in each pillar to provide the most integrated approach possible for the enterprise and allow the different components to pick and choose what's going to work best for them, and using our technical roadmap at headquarters at HQ as an exemplar for the organization. So I think I've really talked enough about how we got here. Let me just have a couple success stories from the organization. So we've been making significant strides in establishing a new authoritative digital identity across DOE. We're implementing a solution provided by the Department of Interior and integrating that with USA staffing to manage enrollment of DOE staff and to subsequently be able to upload all that to USA Access because we absolutely need to know who our employees are before we can do anything else. And when we say employees, it gets very complicated because DOE has federal employees, we have contractor employees, and then we have people who really aren't our employees but need access to our systems. So what do you do if you have a Chinese national that needs access to your systems? You're not going to issue them a PIF card. So how do you identify who they are and how do you give them access? So we have some very interesting problems that we have to resolve in order to get to the MFA assurance levels we need across our systems. We also have very interesting problems in devices, right? We're working closely with CDM But that only really deals with our IT systems. We have OT systems at the power marketing administrations. And guess what? The grid has to stay up all the time. So when you start getting to OT systems, the rules are very different. The capabilities are very different, and the compensating controls we have to put in place are very different than some of the things we would normally do for ZTA. And then finally, we have lots and lots of IoT devices across DOE as well. And those are primarily science labs. And so tracking, understanding what you've got in science labs is incredibly challenging over time because they're constantly changing, and we can't use the standard processes to manage those. So we've worked closely with CDM team, but we have much work to do on the rest of the ecosystem. And then in applications, we've implemented and onboarded systems into the VDP program, the vulnerability disclosure program, for those of you not familiar with it, that's allowed us to enhance the resilience of our internet accessible systems, get reports from the public about issues that we may have on our systems. And we are making huge strides towards ensuring everything at DOE supports HTTPS. And then finally, we are using cyber modernization funds to support technical projects and pilots that will serve as a model across the enterprise. So a few of our projects, just very briefly, we're working on zero trust identity to reduce the attack surface of the agency and implementing authentication methods to make common phishing techniques ineffective. We're working on single sign-on to enforce strong MFA levels across our environment. We use it in many, many places, but it's not everywhere as of now. So that's project progress we're making. And then encryption. We've talked about encrypting data at rest at length. That works really well on some systems, not so well on others. And so we're working to ensure that we're able to implement encryption wherever we can. And then we're just collaborating on technology solutions across the enterprise, and then sharing our findings with folks across DOE, folks in the interagency as partners. So that's the less than exciting part of my speech, talking about zero trust, but I know some people are deeply interested in that, so I wanted to make sure I shared that information. I'm much more interested in the next thing we're going to talk about, which is going to take us almost to the end, which is workforce. So I know it's absolutely vital that we acknowledge that workforce is the most important issue we have. We have huge issues recruiting and retaining the workforce of the future to meet our mission. It's a challenge we all have. My office leads cyber workforce developments on behalf of DOE. And, we talk about hiring authorities. Well, I'd argue we have all the hiring authorities we need. It's not hiring authorities. It's finding the right candidate, paying them competitively, and getting them on board in a reasonable amount of time. Even with direct hire, I had a candidate on a direct hire, took 6 months to onboard recently. I'm like, well, they're a direct hire, they're a current government employee, they've got a security clearance. How does it take me 6 months to onboard this person? So we still have huge challenges in terms of getting the right people on board before they, thankfully this person was employed. Otherwise, they might have gone and taken another job. So next slide, please. So let's talk about the components. So I talked about hiring a little bit. So workforce development, when it's done right, it's a significant investment. I think the government really does this pretty well. And there's a saying which I stole from someone, and I can't even remember who anymore, that you can train your folks and worry that they might leave, or not train them and they'll stay. And so, that's really not a very good situation to have them stay. So yes, you're going to train your folks. You're going to people get great experience in the federal government. They get a clearance in cybersecurity. You teach them amazing things. And yes, they will probably leave. And that's okay. That's what's important to understand. It's okay. If they work for you for 3 years or 5 years and they leave, that's all right. You've made investment. You've gotten the value out of that investment. Maybe not all the value you would have liked from that person. But guess what? They then can go somewhere else and contribute to our collective defense. They can be part of the ecosystem that makes us all more successful. So do not hesitate to provide the training your staff needs, or you will end up with a staff that can't meet your needs. So we also know there's a workforce shortage in cybersecurity. The last number I heard, which is old, was 1 million fewer people in cybersecurity than we need. It's probably even worse now. Currently the latest federal cyber workforce report cited 40,000 public sector cyber jobs were going unfilled. I can tell you that my colleagues call me and they're like, hey, do you know anybody for this job? I'm like, no, I'm hiring someone for that too. This constant back and forth that we have trying to fill our cybersecurity jobs. I haven't had a CISO in 9 months. Got a great acting CISO, but I need to hire a new CISO. That's not easy. So at DOE, we're combating this challenge on multiple fronts. We're looking to attack new talent, retain our workforce, excuse me, and also equip people with the skills and training they need. So with recruitment, one of the things we know is we need to train people early, right? We need to look at college students and get them into government. It's much harder to get someone from private sector into government than it is to get someone out of college into government. So we have in our second year now, our DOE Omni Technology Internship Program. And that gives students the opportunity to work across over 3 years, 3 different DOE sites. We try to have them end up in a science lab, in an NSA facility at headquarters. And then if they're successful in the program, they're done, they're ready for a clearance, and we'll clear them at the end of that program. And then they will be able to come to work, hopefully for us, but if not for us, for somebody else in the federal government, because they come with a security clearance. And we've had some interns, even in the first year, stay on throughout the whole school year working part-time. So it's been a great opportunity to get those cyber skills and other IT skills into the organization. And we had a couple hundred last year. We're hoping to have some more than that this year, and we're hoping to continue to grow that program. And it's focused on underrepresented communities and in STEM, so underrepresented demographics, as well as students who come from underserved communities, to try and give those students a leg up in our programs. Because one of the things we know is a lot of government internships are not paid, right? And if you're a political science major who comes from a family with a lot of money, you want to go work for the government and you're desperate to do that, you'll find a way to make it work. But engineering students are not going to take unpaid internships. And our sites are not very conveniently located. You know, try and go to Albuquerque or even worse, Los Alamos for the summer. So we set everything up so that we can get the students there, we get them housing, we make it all work, and we pay them a reasonable wage so they'll come join the program. So that's our hiring program. We've also convened a community of CIO council, community of practice, not we as in DOE, but we have one on the CIO council on cyber retention programs. And we've worked with agencies with similar established programs to share their approaches and lessons learned. We were one of the early agencies launching the cyber retention incentive program, which we found to be successful in retaining some people. And we're also one of the inaugural departments that put in the request for the 2210 and a couple other codes for special salary rates. So we know that at lower levels, at lower grades, we are not competitive. At high and mid grades, we are, but not at lower grades. So we're trying to close that gap. And then, as I mentioned, ongoing workforce development. I just can't overemphasize the importance. We host a number of training opportunities and skill building exercises, which are open to some of these are open to everyone. We have our cyber fire training twice a year, which is an OT training exercise open to anyone who wants to participate, and for government folks at no charge. So we have lots and lots of things we do. In fact, just next week, DOE is hosting our annual Cybersecurity and Technology Innovation Conference in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And the conference will explore the developments and challenges in cybersecurity, technology innovation, workforce development, and critical infrastructure protection. We have, as of this morning, almost 1,300 people coming to Minneapolis for that conference, including apparently a few people in this room, I heard. Yeah, there we go. Thank you. So yeah, so good. And all I've said, I checked I've been saying for months. So last year we were in Portland. I said, oh, the weather in June in Portland's lovely. It's going to be great. We had lousy weather for anyone who was there, you remember. So this year I've said it just probably won't snow. Well, the good news, it looks like it's going to be in the 60s. So should be a nice trip, at least as good as the weather is here right now. So I really want to close by thanking for you for inviting me here and for having this event. It's always great to make the drive out of DC and go somewhere else. It also gives me the opportunity to drive my car, which I hardly ever get to do in DC unless you count 2 miles to the office. I don't know if my staff meant this as a pun. They said for recharging and reconnecting with my peers, and I have an electric car. So that might have just been a little bit of a joke on their part. But it gives us a chance to return with a fresh outlook. So we're really pleased to be able to be here this morning again, and thank you for your time.
And thank you for those detailed remarks. I'd never hear you speak, but that I don't learn something and get some more insight. So thank you very much. In fact, before the talk, Ann and I were comparing. I drove my first electric car a couple of weeks ago in Ann's old stomping ground, Palo Alto, San Mateo, Sunnyvale, San Jose area. And it was quite an experience. And I actually visited an old friend I've known for 50 years who has a hydrogen powered car. There are such things only in California, but we were advised not to light up that Camel while refilling it with liquid hydrogen. So I've got some insight even on electric cars too today. So excellent. All right, so we heard from a prominent and well-recognized CIO. For the rest of the session, we're going to have a series of panels on some of the functions that support the overall CIO function. We'll have panels on data, security, and technology. But before we do that, Tom Suter has a brief word for you.
Thanks, Tom. Just real quick, as many of you know, we've got a lot of different programs here at ATARC. One of the recent initiatives that we started last year was this podcast thing. And I was initially very skeptical of it, but it ended up being fantastic. So we've had this federal IT newscast for a little bit, and we did get some kudos. We're right on the heels of Fed News Network. We finished the #2 federal podcast to Fed News Network, and I told Jason we're going to get him next year. But we started another series with the Chief Digital and Artificial Intelligence Office in the DoD, and it's our AI efficiency turning tomorrow into today podcast. And really, we're doing some things that we hadn't done before at ATARC, and it's been a lot of fun. We've had what we do is we interview government folks, and then we interview people outside of government. So we've had our share of government folks. We've recently got Anil Chaudhry over there. And of course, we have Brian Erickson, you'll hear from shortly. I did that interview, Captain Brian Erickson, who's the Chief Data Officer of the U.S. Coast Guard. We also interviewed people like Alexander Wang, and he's the founder and CEO of Scale AI. And I think this is sort of self-proclaimed, but I believe it. He was the world's youngest self-made billionaire. I looked it up. I guess he was technically a billionaire at age 24. I'm doing something wrong. Wow, 24. I got to get my son working, he's that age. So really cool. I interviewed a gentleman named Sam Bendit, and Sam is the foremost expert in the United States on autonomy and AI for Russia. So he's like the Russian expert. And I interviewed somebody from Electronic Arts talking about how they're looking at the U.S. military, how we're going to do simulations. So that's a lot of fun. I would love for you to all download it and listen to it. It's pretty cool. But if you have any suggestions for somebody interesting in government, outside of government, let us know. I do some of the interviews. We have our a young lady, Bonnie Evangelista from the CDO, does a lot of the interviews. And then of course we have Kirsten does some, and actually we're doing recordings as we speak. We have a podcast, a hidden podcast studio here on site. So thank you.
Well, Tom, you've got a long way to go. My show, The Federal Drive, gets about 45,000 podcast downloads a month because you can download the entire show or you can download a individual interview, of which I have 15 original interviews a week, plus the interviews with our reporters. So we're a little, but yeah, this medium has really come on strong. You know, well, I won't go into it, but there was only paper with ink when I started out. So I love the multiplicity of media available to get the word out. Really doesn't matter how you do it. And one last comment on electric cars. They don't have AM radio. So we're going to have to get after Elon Musk and some of the others and you can do some shielding with the wiring and getting an AM signal so you can get it back in the car. All right, so let me welcome up my colleague for our first panel on the CDO initiative. Jory Heckman is one of our star reporters at Federal News Network. He also hosts a weekly show all about data, is I'm correct on that. So be sure to download that one or listen to it weekdays, what day? Wednesdays at 2:30 on 1500 AM or anytime online or on your own device. Jory Heckman, come on up.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks, ATARC, for having me here. Panelists, please come on up. I'll introduce you in a moment. But thank you so much, Tom, for the plug for All About Data. Great to see other folks getting into the audio biz, the podcast biz, and yeah, All About Data. Please check it out. It's got my face on it. Hard to miss, but we've had some great folks. Bonnie Evangelista has been on the show. Speaking of her, over at Tradewind, and yeah, we have. Every other week, we have folks lining up, talking about all things data, all things artificial intelligence, and that will be a little bit more of what we're going to dive into here in a moment. And of course, please keep those questions, jot them down once you have them. We'll make sure we have time to get to those at the end. I think without any further ado here, I'm going to introduce our panelists. We have Captain Brian Erickson, the Chief Data and Artificial Intelligence Officer over at the Coast Guard. We have Luke Douglas, the Chief Data Officer at the Peace Corps. We have Beth Puchek, the Chief Data Officer at the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services within DHS. And we have Lieutenant Commander Timothy Beach at the Program Executive Office, Integrated Warfare Systems at the Department of the Navy. Everyone, thanks for taking the time. I am just going to give everyone an opportunity to introduce themselves and their agencies a little more fully here. But in that introduction, just tell me a little bit more about your agency's most acute data needs, what's driving the day-to-day, and what are those long-term goals. Luke, you're closest to me. Let's go with you first.
Sure. Hi, all. Can you hear me okay? Good. Okay. So Luke Douglas, Chief Data Officer for the Peace Corps. For those of you that don't know the Peace Corps sends volunteers to countries around the world for 2 years to work with host countries on their most pressing development needs. This is the very last mile of development work. So we'll send a volunteer to a village in a country. It'll be a day drive and then a boat ride over a river and then a day hike on a camel or a donkey. And they'll be in a village with no water, no electricity, and spotty cell service. And that's what we do. And we send volunteers to do that. We do that to advance really three goals. First one is to provide skills where they're needed. Second is to share America with the world. And third is really to bring the world back home. So when those volunteers return to the United States, they know something of the world outside the US. So that's what we do. As you can guess, our most pressing data need is really knowing what's going on out there. We've got 60 plus posts. When we're at full strength, we've got thousands of volunteers around the world, each doing their own project. And in the development space, there's a very high monitoring evaluation burden. Trying to make that, trying to help people understand what's going on out there is really the big thing that we struggle with.
All right, thanks for that, Luke. Lieutenant Commander Beach, over to you.
Good morning, everybody. All right, so the mouthful of PEO IWS. So the DoD, I think many of you are familiar with, but there are different echelons of command, right? You have Department of Energy, Department of the Defense, and that's kind of your top level echelons. And then they break down in the Department of Defense into the different services, and the services break down to get all the way down to the individual warfighters. So we kind of sit in the middle. The program executives generally are charged with following the secretaries, the chiefs of the service, as well as the 4-stars that are in charge of actually fighting the war and balancing these all together to create the systems that they need and to actually go procure, to do all the development, the full life cycle, to deliver something of value to the warfighter to enhance their ability to do their job. For us, integrated warfare systems, we sit inside the Naval Sea Systems Command. We specifically turn ships into warships. So imagine taking the amphibs and the carriers. You see the amphibs drop off the Marines, the carriers bring the air wing, as well as the smaller, they call them the shooters, right? The faster, more agile, smaller ships that are there to help protect the bigger ships and to also bring the war to the enemy. And so sensors, weapons, we collect all the data, we bring the data in, we use data centers, create interfaces with humans, and then enable the human and the machine to then send whatever the delivery of choice is, whether it's kinetic or non-kinetic, meaning physical or electronic, to the enemy. So you can imagine what comes with that is a whole plethora of data problems. How much data? How do you pass it? What are the limitations? How do you keep it safe? How do you get it back to shore? We in the program office need to know what the right thing to do is, and then be able to take business data and put it on top of that to look at the constraints and figure out what we should do, can do, and then balance those out against the needs of the administration, the operation, and the actual warfighter. So we have a lot of challenges that we are working through. So.
Excellent. Thanks for that. Captain Erickson, over to you.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Captain Brian Erickson, Chief Data and Artificial Intelligence Officer for the United States Coast Guard. I am in my 31st year in the Coast Guard. Traditionally have been a helicopter search and rescue pilot, and then just over the last 2 years landed this role as the Coast Guard's first Chief Data Officer. So we went about 231 years in our organization without a chief data officer or any people kind of looking at the organization through a data lens. And over the last 2 years, we've been in a data transformation to become more data driven and a more data literate organization. And I'm kind of like the champion that's leading that charge. And I rely on a lot of partners in DoD, as well as my partners in DHS. And you'll hear from Beth here, who's one of my mentors as I took on this role and one of the DHS shining stars of data right to my left here. I think that some of our the big challenges and things that I'm working on are focused around culture, process, people, and technology. I'll get a chance to talk a little bit about those today. Those are kind of the 4 buckets where I see on a day-to-day basis, I'm filling those buckets up within the organization at different rates. So glad to be here.
All right. And Beth, over to you.
Thank you. My name is Beth Puchek. I'm the Chief Data Officer for U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, which is part of the Department of Homeland Security. For those of you that are not familiar with what USCIS does, we adjudicate applications for immigration benefits. So be it applications to become a naturalized citizen or a legal permanent resident, which is getting a green card, or an employment visa, an H-1B or H-2A, adjudicating those benefit requests. So USCIS is a data-driven organization. It always has been. We're still in the transition from paper data on paper to digital data. So that's one of our primary challenges, is how can we accelerate getting all of that paper data into a digital format so that we can start to accelerate those decisions. We have a large backlog of unadjudicated cases. So one of the things that I am excited to do is to help our agency become more data-driven, to accelerate those decisions, to drive down that backlog, to get benefits in the hands of the applicants as quickly as possible. And USCIS has had a chief data officer for about 4 years now. I've been in the job for a little over 2. But one of the, I think, biggest successes for USCIS was starting off with developing a data strategy. It was that signal to the whole organization that data is important. Let's get on this train together, because actually being so data driven, everyone has a lot of ideas on where to focus your time and energy and what to do. But the strategy really helped rally everyone around 4 central goals.
All right, thanks, everyone. Captain Erickson, I wanted to throw the first question to you here. I think the last ATARC function I saw you at, your title was the Chief Data Officer, and now you are the Chief Data and AI Officer. We're hearing about AI every day, it seems, but I would love to hear from you. What changed, and what does this new title mean in terms of widening the aperture of your day-to-day expectations and your long-term goals?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. And so we, from the beginning, like I was telling you about this data transformation that the Coast Guard is under, back in 2020, August of 2020, the Vice Commandant at the time, Admiral Charlie Ray, chartered a data readiness task force, and the efforts were to get after data technology, figure out the way ahead for the organization to become more data driven. And we had some senior leaders who recognized that data was not just a tech function. I think that for the previous 30 years that we were dealing with technology, computers, et cetera. I think that we just looked at it as an IT function, and that the data is just a part of IT. And we recognized that, hey, that's not the case, that this is really a core business function. And so we started to, like Beth said, we started to lay out a data strategy, begin to put in place the functional governance structure that would be necessary to start to look at our data, to treat it more like a strategic asset and leverage our data as a strategic asset. While that was happening, we were learning from peer groups, Department of Defense, industry best practices, and recognize that both data and analytics should sit together in the organization. And we set up this office of data and analytics just last September that has 3 divisions: a data and integration division, or a data integration division, a data analytics division, and a data governance and strategy division. So right from the start, we knew that we wanted to keep analytics together. And so I was the chief of this office, or I am the chief of this office, and I'm also the chief data officer. As we looked at what functions we were performing within the office and as my role, we felt that the chief data and artificial intelligence officer was more appropriate for the entire organization to recognize what function it was that we were doing in the office. Also, I think that it's a signal to the organization that we are paying attention to this. We have a very young organization. Our workforce does not, you don't hire a active duty Coast Guardsman by saying, hey, this is the type of role that we need, and we need you at the mid-level when you come into the organization. You start out at 17 or 17 to 24, and you go to boot camp, and then you kind of work your way up. And it's kind of a long-term military way. We're looking at better ways perhaps to bring on talent at certain levels, but that creates a relatively young organization. And this young organization is interested in artificial intelligence and gaining the value from it. And so we thought that this was the right choice.
All right. And turning to your colleague elsewhere within DHS, Beth, I know the department-wide look on AI is growing in terms of interest, in terms of focus. I think DHS has recently formed an AI task force. In terms of that, what that task force means for you and the focus over at USCIS, what are the concerns that you guys have with AI? What are you trying to get your arms around? And what's the ultimate focus for AI for you guys?
Sure. I think it's finding the right use cases for USCIS. A lot of those adjudicative decisions to grant immigration benefits, they're very important decisions to make. So we don't take the automation or, giving that to technology to create very lightly. But there are parts of the organization that really benefit from AI and ML technologies. For example, in the customer service realm, when folks need to know what the status of their benefit processing is, they can call the customer service part of our organization and start through just like, you were to call any other customer service desk, you would start off with, pressing 1 to talk to a person, press 2 if you're interested in why. And those are great use cases. They can help us focus our resources to the benefit processing. So I think for us, it's finding the right spot and growing from there.
All right, Lieutenant Commander Beach, of course, the whole focus for DoD at this point is getting the right data to the right people at the right time, and that challenge is multiplied when you talk about kind of the battlefield environment, or that rugged edge that the data needs to get to. How ultimately do you pull it off? Do you pull that off?
How much time do you have? So just like you would eat an elephant, I guess, one bite at a time. You have to add value with every step. And I think people overuse the term minimum viable product, but the idea that you focus on an outcome and you draw it all the way back to the data that you need, and then you understand the system that you're trying to take the data and get an outcome from. It's both a human and a machine problem, and you have to work through it that way. A lot of times we like to approach as a technology problem. This IT will solve it. This IT is going to do it for us. And it never does, because it's about humans being able to use the IT in a system that operates with more than one level of complexity. It gets even more complicated when you throw in things like edge, right? Edge, largely referring to anything like a cell phone or something that is out towards the end. And it's about, do you move data to the center, do something smart with it, and then move it back to the edge? Do you keep data at the edge, move the processing and the algorithm there? And it's a big balance. And so there's a lot of talk about a risk-based approach, but I really think it's a balance-based approach, right? Like you said, every decision is important. AI doesn't know that. We don't weight things. AI makes a decision, right? That learning algorithms weight it based on human input, not on whether or not that specific decision is important. So every decision to it is like life-changing, quite literally, because that's how the algorithms work. So to me, this is about how do you still focus on the humanity of it, that you have at the end of the day, your goal here is an outcome of protecting those that are at sea, protecting us, be able to affect swiftly and with the right amount of force and impact. And it goes back to a lot of different factors, but for me, less is more. Sometimes the right solution is finding the right data, the right people, and identifying a clear chain, and then coming up with a solution, starting off with trusted and secure, and then worrying about scalability.
Okay, great. And Luke, in terms of that worldwide footprint, the 60 posts you mentioned overseas, worldwide, internationally, again, that challenge of getting the right data to the right people at the right time, that's a challenge for anyone's mission, but of course that's pretty acute in terms of that global footprint. How do you make it happen?
I think the big thing that we focus on is we key on what we call the operational spine of the data, what's really important for delivery of the volunteers to the places they need to be. We have a ton of different systems running. We have our own healthcare system that we provide for volunteers with all of the, data headaches that come along with that. We have transport systems and all these different pieces, but the main focus that we have is making sure that we can get data about where volunteers are in the volunteer life cycle to all of the major decision makers. And if we can maintain that piece of information and that insight, we will have done our job. In a resource constrained environment, access constrained environment, sometimes that takes the form of CSVs printed out and handed to someone. But as long as we can get the information to that last mile, that's our main focus.
Okay. And, of course, when we talk about the automation piece of things, getting that data to people, the demand signal for that data is increasing, and the pace of getting that data to the right people, it just is a really tall order to do. Beth, it occurs to me what you said a moment ago is that this is really a workforce multiplier. This is enabling the human operators to do more work, tackle more of the claims that are coming in, more of the caseload that's coming in. How is that automation and having that human in the loop really essential to meeting that mission of serving your customers?
Yeah, so data is a key enabler. So is all of the automation that you could imagine. You can, and we do this right now, you can look at the data in a case, or the system can look at the data of a case and help the adjudicator make the decision, prepare certain checks so that they don't have to swivel chair into, multiple different systems, to the Department of State, to ICE, to CBP, to see where this person may have been. They can prepare that for them so that it's pre-populated. The decision can be made that much faster. So one of the challenges that I have that I would love to, I've been focusing on, I think, for a few years now, and I'm starting to see kind of some glimmers of hope, are more access to our partners' data. It becomes increasingly more important when we face these large humanitarian challenges, that we faced over the course of the past several years with the Ukraine, with the evacuation from Afghanistan. Getting data to the right decision makers is critical. And when data that a USCIS adjudicator needs resides in a Department of State system, we need access to it much faster, much bigger, so that we can prepare these decisions en masse, so that they don't take hours of research. They can be popped in a matter of minutes or seconds.
All right. Anyone else want to take that? Because that seems like such a common challenge, the breaking down of the data silos. Anyone else have an idea of how to go about that, how to, make that data sharing a little more cohesive?
Well, what I will say that we've been trying to do, again, in CIS, we're very fortunate that a lot of our data is in the cloud already. So when our partners are able to also get in the cloud, and technologies do enable cloud to cloud sharing, it becomes that much easier to gain bulk access, and not bring it into our environment, but to look at it in bulk from their environment. So the sooner that our partners can get all of their data in the cloud and start to invest in these cloud to cloud technologies, we're all much stronger for it. So that's what I've been working very closely with my immigration partners to get to that point.
Okay. Any other takers in the data silo question?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Beth. Like, technology is really helping, get rid of data silos in our organization as well. And we are on a journey to the cloud as well. We have one of my colleagues at Coast Guard, you may have heard from John White. Commander John White is in charge of the data and cloud branch, which is just a new branch again that was just stood up this year. And this year we are moving a number of our on-prem services to the cloud. both, I think AWS and Azure clouds. We just over this last year moved to Microsoft 365. So you're starting to see some of the some silos begin to start to break down by technology alone in this particular case. I think there's also always this problem where the stewards that were put in place are sometimes overprotective of their silos, and they're being good stewards for the government. And I think it's CDOs and CDAO's job to help eliminate some of those fears of, hey, the goal here isn't to keep it tight. It's the goal here is to maximize the sharing for the right people, and technology can help us do that. It can help us ensure that identity management and zero trust and privacy can all be cared for in a secure environment.
Yeah. Lieutenant Commander Beach, when I was talking with Beth a moment ago about the automation piece of things, I used the phrase human in the loop, and I think that is a DoD originated term there. In terms of that human in the loop and the kind of the concerns that CDOs have with automation, where is that right balance of having the human in the process, and what's, where should they be positioned so that the automation does what it's supposed to, but doesn't run haywire beyond what it's not supposed to?
All right. So I want to make one point that'll tie in. So one of the things that is key in my mind is to back off the last 30 years of what we grew up knowing, which is applications are the immutable center of what we do. Applications bring capability is largely anchored to some kind of application or product delivery. And that's actually how we have a lot of our programs set up, where you don't deliver an integrated system, you deliver a product or a set of products. And that is actually what, per Title 10, the person who is given that warrant by Congress, they're the ones that get dragged to the carpet when it comes time. And the reason I want to bring that up is because, right, once upon a time, the earth was the center of the universe. And then we discovered that the sun was, right? And applications used to be the immutable center. And there was good reason in the 70s when it came about relational databases and how we started developing software and the GUI came in and all of the things that happened from that. But what we didn't do was in digital transformation land is that in the 80s, we started to discover you had to devolve from that specific center and that relational database, and you had to start treating these layers of the tech stack as independent and start to abstract them. And so when it comes to human in the loop, I think to me, human in the loop is just have the human in the loop from the beginning of developing things, the system, and having constant feedback from not only the people who know the technology, but the people who are going to use the technology and use the system, as well as the people who have to build and maintain and own the system. And so when I try to bring this around full circle, I think that humanity has to be the center of all of it. And when I say that, it sounds a little bit facetious, but the only thing you really own is data. In the cloud and all of these other things, you're really just borrowing other people's tech stack. You're paying to borrow it and have it managed in a certain way. So you own your data and you own your people. And if you don't clearly identify your people and segregate the importance and value of your data in a way that is understandable and can be conveyed to a agnostic tech stack that somebody else owns and protected, then you're in trouble. And what we have trouble doing is breaking down those two things. What is the identity? What matters? The roles, the attributes, all of the other things, RBAC, ABAC, and the other things you hear there. And then how do you take what is currently security by opinion in a lot of these classification guides, and how do you take that into something you can help an IT stack understand and implement properly? And if you can't get back to those two core things, I don't know the problem. And the other side of that is just when you look at humans, right? Some say, well, the whole point is to put this in front of decision makers and have a debate. If you get to the point where you need to have two humans debating a subject, you can't automate that. So you want to automate the process of ensuring that what you give them is the right story so that they can go have not a 90% discussion about whether they trust what they're seeing, but a 100% discussion about the right thing to do and the limitations that they have.
All right, Luke, I'm seeing some vigorous head nods here.
Yeah,
Chime in.
yeah. I mean, just violent agreement with that. I think one of the big things, so two pieces that I think are relevant to this is at the Peace Corps, the CDO function and our advanced analytics function and all of that. And my office sits outside the OCIO. In a lot of places, CDO sits within the OCIO or is very closely connected. We have it's not adversarial relationship, but almost kind of frenemy relationship with the OCIO, which I think is really beneficial because we're pushing them. We're saying, you know, okay, cool. I don't care what, oh, it's on-prem, it's in the cloud. Great. Do whatever you need to do. Get us this data. It needs to be available here. It needs to be refreshed on this thing. We need to have these people accessing it. We have all these different pieces. And having that split, you know, I don't report to the OCIO, so I can tell him that's not working. And that's been tremendously powerful for us. And I think the other thing that really was making me nod my head was, you know, we always talk about dashboards and scorecards and all those kinds of things. And it's to what end, right? You say, okay, I'm going to build you this beautiful thing that tells you this stuff that you want to know. And then I'll put it in front of you, decision maker. Now what, right? And if there's not a decision point or if there's not an action taken from receiving that information, not only is the utility of the dashboard kind of in question, but you can never move to that next stage, right? How do you move into automated decision making rather than just having it be this, you know, oh, look at it, great, that's nice, and everyone feels happy. So anyway, just completely agree with everything you're saying.
And I have to add one cool tidbit. So that the CDO versus the CIO. So the very first CDO of a Fortune 500 company, Carolyn Carruthers, right? She wrote the book literally on being the data officer. And one of the examples she uses is talking about data and information. And I think it's a little cheeky. She is British. Talks about how data in context give you information. So how could information ever be over data? The other thing it says is data with context is information with context is knowledge. But to get to wisdom, you need experience, right? And so some of this is about how do you properly track that, right? Because at the end of the day, if I just collect all the data, I have no context, how do I get information or knowledge out of it? And then what's the right time to need to apply wisdom? So I think having the CDO underneath the CIO does a lot of things that is problematic, and that's a much different discussion, but it's good context.
I think the whole panel is actually outside the CIO because I know Beth is and I am. I sit beside the CIO, and I know what you mean by the frenemy relationship, and I agree. You know, we've kind of we're very, very new to this in the Coast Guard, and the CIO and I have had to try to figure out where the lanes were, right? Because for the previous 230 years, there was no CDO, and all of a sudden there's a CDAO, and where am I going to bring value to the organization? And as a gentleman's handshake, just to get started, you bring the tech, CIO, I bring the practice of data and AI. And so that's kind of where we have been able to just start our path. I'm going to bring the practice of data and AI, you bring the tech, and we're going to be business partners for all the business verticals in the organization and help them extract the maximum value out of their data. Beth.
Yeah, no, Captain Erickson and I have seen some of the struggles of our CDO colleagues that are part of a CIO organization. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges because it dilutes the importance, I think, a little bit of the data. We always hear how resources are so limited, especially in the data space. And they become even more limited when it's part of the CIO's budget. At that point, data is competing with things like cybersecurity, and zero trust is competing with things like keeping our networks alive and allowing virtual interviews to take off. So removing it from that context of technology is really important. And I don't know if it was Luke or Tim that said it, but data is a core business function. So it does make sense for it to live outside of that CIO function. And I think that's been one of the biggest reasons that we've probably been successful.
I'd also like to add
Sure.
one thing, which is, so Gene Kim wrote the Phoenix Project and the Unicorn Project, right? Which was essentially about how software became, how do you start creating software factories, right? How do you break apart, start doing things uniquely? And there's a whole piece about data, but one of the interesting things that he makes a comment on was bureaucracies use policy and process to shield people. And I almost see CDO and CIO as the two sides of the with and without, like the giant history of policy and process. In a perfect world, before all that, and a lot more in the more forward-leaning tech companies, right? It's an even playing field to begin with. But you need to bring the CDO and you need it outside of the CIO because you have to be able to not have the giant burden of 30 years of history in your entire workforce to have all of the policy and process built up to protect those humans from the giant organization. You need somebody to be able to have a little more freedom and elbow room to go really generate that business line of data and tie it into the core of how the bureaucracy works.
Well, it's interesting to see where you guys fit in the org chart because CDOs, just by virtue of being the new kids on the block in the C-suite, every department is going to be a little bit different. To title back, Captain Erickson, I think you were saying earlier, this all falls down into, people, culture, and tech. To focus on the people side for a little bit, because you guys are new positions, relatively speaking. The culture of, data-driven decision-making is a relatively new concept for folks as well, at least, as this formalized discipline that we're all learning about. In terms of getting the personnel, the workforce on board with that, the necessary reskilling and upskilling that comes along with it. How do you get people interested in this and to take it seriously as a discipline?
Yeah, so there's varying levels of interest, right? We have, for a long period of time, we've had a operations research data analytics degree at the academy. We have an operations research data analytics postgraduate education program for officers. We've hired ORDA professionals, analysts within the organization. So the analyst side of it is probably the most mature part of what I would call my work roles. And what we are coming up with recently, the DoD cyber workforce framework, DCWF, yep, cyber workforce framework came up with 11 new innovation roles, and they were across artificial intelligence and data. I mean, AI practitioner, data chief data officer was even one of them. So they had 11 roles. 11 wasn't going to work, and often in the U.S. Coast Guard is one of the 6 armed forces, but the only one outside of DoD and very small. We will, have influence from some new DoD initiative, but really can't we just don't have the amount of people that are going to, fill these buckets, right? So we often have to modify ever so slightly, but there's benefit in trying to be as linked as close as possible because we are going to fight with the warfighter, when necessary, and we want to train that way. And so we've come up with 5 work roles for data and AI professionals that we are going to start to train to. Data steward, data analyst, data scientist, AI ML practitioner, and the last one was data engineer. So those 5 work roles are where we are going to go with our data professionals, but the rest of the organization as well. We're all going to bring our literacy up together. So we have plans to educate executives, data operators, and then these data professionals, these data and AI professionals. I saw this quote. It wasn't too long ago from General Shinseki, right? He was the first 4-star Asian American general, and he had this famous quote. I just love it. He said, "If you dislike change, you're going to dislike irrelevance even more." And I hung that in my office because this role as the first CDO, CDAO for the Coast Guard, I am running a change management organization. It feels like a startup. We have a lot of room to maneuver. Our commandant, Admiral Linda Fagan, who got in the position last June, said to us that, and this is kind of her theme, tomorrow looks different and so will we. And that for me in my office is a license to operate, a license to make changes that will go after new processes and automation and explore artificial intelligence to our benefit. So that's kind of where I'm headed.
All right, we're in the home stretch here, so everyone think of your questions. We'll continue this conversation in terms of the reskilling, upskilling, but once we have another answer or so in the queue here, we'll get to your questions. So anyone else on the reskilling, upskilling piece of things? It's a big topic, obviously, but how are you getting the workforce to buy into this and understand the value proposition of getting the data maturity up to speed, getting data in a condition where you guys can do day-to-day decision making?
I know at CIS, again, we're such a data-driven organization. We have 1,000 analysts across our agency of 20,000 employees. And when I first started, we were very focused on setting a baseline set of skills and understanding of those data analysts through what we called Analyst University and basic training. We've grown that to intermediate, the intermediate program, but we focus mostly on analysts. But what about the other 19,000 employees in USCIS? So we've been focused on the last year and a half on trying to hit those other personas. We have 6 personas across our organization. And this past year has been all about, it's been much more tailored, the messaging and focusing on small groups, because that's how folks will remember what's important. That's how you're able to translate what's important to them and how data can help them achieve their goals. So we're focusing on, again, our 6 personas for us, our analysts, the data architect, mission support, the adjudicator, of course, a mid-level manager, first-line supervisors, of those adjudicators and leadership. So what tools, what resources can we provide to those different personas to help them make their jobs easier through data? And there's so much open source content out there. A lot of being able to touch those folks is curating it and serving it up to them on a platter, which is manageable. It's an easy thing to do. Much more so compared to trying to focus on analysts and making sure they know how to work with our data and present things in a certain way. So it's been really fun trying to focus on those other interest areas in USCIS.
All right, I think we have time for maybe one question. Tom, if you want to flag down a lucky
One question, it better be a good one, huh?
No pressure.
Hello, this is Eric Florence. I'm with Veracode, and when you talk about data and gathering it, I'm just curious, do you guys have metrics on the accuracy of your analytics? And how do you continuously tune so that you can get the trust that your data is good?
2 minutes. All right, how about 2 seconds? Honestly, trust is a human thing, right? Trust, calculation's a calculation, right? Computers can do that. Trust is human. So to me, it's about the human side of the problem and them trusting that, not owning and seeing everything and it being in their grasp, it's still trustworthy and secure. And yes, there are a lot of mechanisms of which it would take a lot of time. So happy to talk offline.
All right. Well, everyone, thanks so much. Round of applause for this great panel here. All right. Thanks for being here. Yep.
Yeah, that last comment on having a trusted system, be careful because John Kindervog is going to reappear and hit you with a wet noodle 57 times. So appreciate it very much. Okay, we have a lot more content this morning, a couple of announcements. Make sure that you take your bingo card around the sponsors, get that stamp with a chance to win a prize. Please stick with us. We've got another hour and a half or so of really great content. You know, you're not going back to the office after this anyway, and all that email response can wait. So please be with us. We're going to take a half-hour break. We will reconvene back here at 11 o'clock sharp. Again, say hi to those sponsors. They make it possible. Okay, and welcome back. Before we get to the next panel, at the indulgence of Tom Suter, I just want to make a plea. I want you to think about three organizations. One is the Federal Employee Education and Assistance Fund, which is about a 20-year-old foundation that helps federal employees, often those that are at the lower pay levels and in the hinterlands, with emergency loans, emergency grants, and also collegiate scholarships for their kids. And then the second organization is Friends of Patients at the NIH, which provides housing and transportation and other kind of humane services to those who are in the NIH for clinical trials and are already having life issues, often financial issues. And the third organization is the U.S. War Dogs Association, which takes dogs that have served in combat, principally for the ground armed forces, the Marine Corps and the Army, but they're in the other forces also. They take these dogs after their service, pay for their rehabilitation and their veterinary bills, and often reunite them with the now veterans who handled them during the wartime situation. Wonderful group. Every year now, this is the fourth year, with the kind sponsorship as the presenting sponsor is Carasoft, who is also our top sponsor here, and also ATARC. Tom Suter has backed this effort now in its fourth year. My fourth annual motorcycle ride for charity, organized through Federal News Network. If anyone is interested in becoming one of our corporate sponsors, and it's not a giant lift, by the way, we're talking, $1,000 or $3,000 per company. Or if you'd like to be an individual contributor, or if you ride a motorcycle and want to join us for the ride itself, in fact, that QR code will take you right to the individual sign-up page. But see me afterwards if you'd like to maybe become part of this, some of the vendors, and we can give you all the information. But it's June 23rd. It's coming up fast. This is something I bootstrap personally. Neither the station nor I get $1 out of this personally, just something I do to try to give back to the community. So please consider it. All right, let's get on with our next panel for Chief Information Security Officers. We heard from the data folks. Now we're going to hear from the security folks. Could I ask the panelists to come on up? And I've assigned you seats. So because I'm going to be down there so I can see who's who, and I have you in order as they are. So to my immediate left is Paul Blahush. He is the Chief Information Security Officer at the Department of Labor. To his left is Jyothi Dugar. She is the Deputy Director, Acting Center for Information Technology at the National Institutes of Health. Tony Plater is the Chief Information Security Officer for the Navy. And we've got Ty Hughes, Director of the Cybersecurity Integrity Center for the State Department. Good to have you all with us. And I'm going to step down so I can see them. My neck is starting to get to me from 2 days of this, so I'm going to come down there. Okay, and we heard from Ann Duncan, who's a CIO this morning, a lot about what she's doing on the CSO front, or the CISO front, the security front, and developing new ways of getting to that zero trust architecture. And of course, we heard last night from John Kindervag, who says if there's a data breach in any of your agencies, you should all be fired. And maybe the secretary should be fired also, I think was the implication there. So plus we are in the age of lots of new technologies, lots of new methodologies for data analysis, data collection, and in many ways, cybersecurity is becoming a data exercise as much as anything. Our first question is the role of the CISO. How is that changing? And I think, Paul, we'll start with you.
Thanks. So I am Paul Blahush. I'm the CISO, Department of Labor, and I've been the CISO there for 4 or 5 years. Depends whether you count my time as the acting CISO. So how's the role evolving? I don't know if I'm just too new at being a CISO, or if I'm like the lobster in the pot, but I don't know if it's actually been evolving that much on my watch. I know that we were thinking a little bit about that. The evolution is that, I'm not, the CISO is not being so much the technical expert anymore, but more of, a risk management executive. And I do think that's true. I mean, if folks are looking at me in Department of Labor to be the one who's running the vulnerability assessments or triaging the data breach that, by the way, did not happen. Okay, I'm still here, but or triaging the data breach, you know, we're probably in trouble at Department of Labor. That's a skill set that I don't really keep up to date on anymore. So, you know, certainly my role is more, you know, there's this old joke about the two extra layers of the OSI model, right? People and budget. So that's or the politics and budget. That's where I live most of the time, right? So my role is more so that you know, I ask more questions than I give answers to in the on my tech team. But my role is really, you know, to be an evangelist, to be a salesman, to be a team builder. Sometimes I'm the one with my hat in my hand, right? Sometimes I'm a bean counter. And sometimes my role is just to be able to say, you know, that doesn't quite sound right. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Explain that to me again, so that I can determine whether we're going down the right path. I'm a decision maker from courses of action given to me. I generally do not come up myself with the course of action anymore. I've got people who do that, and then I look at those and determine which is the right one. I rack and stack priorities based on budget, resources, business needs, threat landscape, higher level mandates. So really the changes that, if you want to say that there was an evolution and you say that the starting point was that this was the cybersecurity technical expert, I would say now I'm more a partner with agency leadership for overall risk management. And there's a lot of risk besides cyber risk in an agency, but I try to, you know, keep some focus on that. And I am a business person or mission person. I keep focus on the mission. The mission of the Department of Labor, believe it or not, isn't to be the most secure organization in the United States, in the world, whatever. It's to accomplish our mission of promoting, fostering, and bettering the lives of working people, retirees, and job seekers. I mean, that's what we're there for. And that's what I try to keep an eye on and keep the systems up and operational and the data in them secure so we can accomplish our mission. So I keep focus on mission.
All right, I'll complicate the question a little bit for Tony and Ty here. You may recall during the Clinton administration, there was an event, I think this was after Klinger-Cohen, which established CIOs, but CIOs didn't really know what they were supposed to be doing. And there was a purported data breach at Los Alamos National Laboratory, the famous Wen-Ho Lee case. And there was a live press conference going on. And the CIO at the time, I can picture him, I can't remember his name. He'd worked at the Air Force and then was the energy CIO. And Bill Richardson, the CIO, the Secretary of Energy at that time, said, "I've got a question, a live question." He said, "Well, let me ask my computer guy here." And those of us that heard that rolled our eyes. No, the CIO is not the computer guy. This is supposed to be a business leader at the top of the agency. And so it sounds like the same type of thing is happening now for this newly emergent role, the Chief Information Security Officer. So Tony, what's your view of how it's changing?
Very, very similar to what Paul was saying. I think I look back a couple of years because I've been, doing cybersecurity and as cybersecurity director and so forth. It was more about, what is the status of the network? How are we measuring? How are we performing in relationship to industry standards? Of course, I'm coming from the Department of Navy, so we have our portfolio is very diverse, right? From things that are high bandwidth, where we have connected at all times, as we talk about enterprise and business systems, to dealing with things that are afloat, we're disconnected, where we actually have to deal with systems who are bandwidth constrained. So all of that became as initially a focus of what is a technical approach is. How do we ensure we can deliver a lethal force and combat our adversary, but still keep our systems secure and account for all the vulnerabilities and threat. So shift forward today, I am more as a CISO involved in vision. So I do set the division for the the visionary of what we're doing with defend and cybersecurity for the Department of Navy in relationship, but aligned with the DoD strategy. So it's a much different job because I'm asked for what is the 1 to 3 year roadmap? You know, where do we need to go in relationship, and what are those strategic initiatives that we need to undertake? So it takes a different thinking. Before I was more technical, very tactical, and being told, hey, tell me just how you're going to do this. I'm telling you what you need to do. You tell me how you're going to do it. To now, like as Paul said, more about how do I ensure we have a vision and a strategy? How do I ensure that funding is being placed on those priorities? And how do I engage with them much more with business units and all of the other folks? I'm talking you because you typically think of Department of Navy, you're thinking, of course, of the weapon systems, but I'm also interfacing with HR, manpower, workforce issues, just like you have. And then for cybersecurity and from a defend perspective, weighing in on those topics. And also a compliment, Paul brought up another thing, data-driven, right? Digital transformation. So when I'm sitting talking to the CIO and the other business unit, they're very much interested in digital transformation. So how are we making cybersecurity an enabler versus seen as a roadblock? That's my job. That's what I'm graded on, those strategic initiatives and how well I'm making cybersecurity enabler for the department.
Yeah, what you point out is a complicated system where we see operational technology and business information technology coming together too for cyber purposes. This was driven home to me by the Navy when I made a field trip to the Dahlgren Test Center down in Dahlgren, Virginia, watching the gun line shoot shells down the river there. And that was interesting. It was fun to see the things go bang and plop down the river, 10 seconds later. But underneath there is a bunker where every single aspect of what that gun is doing and what that shell is doing, what that cartridge is doing, is recorded, measured, graphed, put into a database, shared back with industry that makes those things, shared back with Navy operators who are going to have to operate them wartime. I really got a good, clear picture of how that all relates. Okay, Ty, State Department, kind of in between here, everybody.
Good morning, just a little in between. I also want to step back and point out, I am not the CISO for the State Department. We have a wonderful CISO, Ms. Donna Bennett. I am the director of the Cybersecurity Integrity Center. We have a lot of overlapping responsibilities. So I'm gonna approach this one from a cyber leader perspective. So it's important to be technology agnostic. We're not going to get pigeonholed into a certain stack, a certain suite, a certain capability. We want to make sure we are technology agnostic and focus on delivering the needs for the business in a secure fashion. Yesterday and today, the CISO was the de facto person or de facto cyber leader who was in charge of risk management. Tomorrow, that same person is now that cyber leader who is in charge of making sure this business unit, this capability, this warfighter, they have the technology and the capabilities that they need in order to make the right risk-based decision. So I see that level of evolution occurring. And just some quick research from our partners with Gartner. They did a lovely study and came back with 4 key things that CISOs and cyber leaders are really thriving at when they're thriving, when they're being successful. And that first thing was being an executive influencer. Are you able to influence your agency? Are you able to influence those within your department, outside your department? Especially those who aren't even in the IT sector, having a good relationship with the CFO because you need to be funded in order to be successful, having a good relationship with those business units and being able to influence some of the decisions that they're making. The second thing was a future risk management, being able to understand what are some of those emerging trends, some of those emerging technologies that you need to make sure your agency is aware of so that you can properly recruit and retain individuals, get the proper technology stacks and things of that nature. And the third one was the workforce management. So making sure you are recruiting people, succession planning, things of that nature. And the last one was stress management. It is a stressful job. CISOs unfortunately have a high burnout rate because they're the follow men and women on at times, but they're doing a really great job. And a lot of times they aren't given enough credit, but stress management is the fourth one. Yep.
All right, so safe to say you gentlemen are not looking at network logs by the hour and seeing what's going on in anomalies. Somebody is doing that.
Yes.
And, you know, cybersecurity is one of those things that has a function, but it's also something that affects everybody in an organization, and one person on one workstation in one bureau in one branch can cause the whole organization to have a problem. So Jyoti, I wanted to ask you from the information management broader standpoint, looking across a huge conglomeration of individual institutes there at the NIH, how can we look at cybersecurity in a holistic way and make sure that everyone understands their individual role in it, even though we have this big CISO function that's operating?
Sure. I am really passionate about this topic. When I started in cybersecurity back in 2005, when it was retitled as Other Duties as Assigned, we've come a long way, and we can still go a lot further in this aspect. If we look around the room, I'm so glad to see that I am not the only female in the room. So thank you for all the female presence in this room as well. It makes me feel better. But we also have to look at cybersecurity from who we are from a humane perspective. So I can really tie into what Lieutenant Commander Beach was talking about from a human-centric perspective, because we bring our whole self to work. And like Ty was saying, cybersecurity and technology is a stressful field. You're connected to technology 24/7, mainly because you have to be, and you go home and then you have all of these other pressures, family pressure, kids, social pressure, all of these things really affect you. And when you bring your whole self to work, there's all the parts of you come into work with you. And the CISO role has evolved into not just being a technical expertise type of role. You really have to bring your creative side as well. So I like to introduce myself not just as the Deputy Director of Technology at the NIH, but also I'm a dance director. I have a wellness practice. I'm a published author. I have a single mom of 3 kids. All of that is part of me, and I bring my whole self to work. So if you look at this cybersecurity field, it's about relationship management. It's about negotiation skills, communication skills, the ability to tell a story, and who can you learn best from but your own kids. They can tell stories to the ceiling for some small thing that they want. I mean, I learned from my kids and my kids learned from me, and I actually bring all of these skills to the workplace setting as well. So you really can't compartmentalize and say, well, this has nothing to do with cybersecurity. You bring all of these aspects to the workplace.
So the whole integrated person should be on the job and not just, you don't turn it off at night. Well, you're right about the diversity. I mean, I went to the first IAC ELC back in 1991, and it was skirted tables like this, but it was not very diverse, the people up on these panels. And I don't think anyone would turn that clock back. In fact, we should point out yesterday we lost Lieutenant General Vince Stewart was one of the pioneering high-ranking Black officers in the Marine Corps, just passed away yesterday. I did an interview with him 3 years ago. And in the aftermath of some of the events early in the pandemic that touched off some of the racial reckoning we've had in the country. And he said, even though despite his courage, despite his talent, despite his drive as a Marine Corps officer, he nevertheless faced racism and incidents throughout his entire career, including as a lieutenant general. So we should point out that that effort never really ends. Okay, let's move on to the CISO question. I wanted to ask the metrics, cybersecurity programs. I mean, you mentioned that you all oversee programs and oversee budgets and oversee the management of cybersecurity, if you will. Not a great word to put on it, but that's what we'll use. How do you know you're doing well? Ty?
All right. So the very first thing with that is, are the business needs being met? You can secure and lock everything down, and if you're not able to sell that widget or fulfill that passport or whatever that business need is, then you're failing. So are the business objectives being met in a secure fashion? So once you get beyond that, you can begin to look at certain metrics, and these might be viewed as SOC. So it might be incident containment time. How long does it take once that incident occurs for your SOC team or your organization to contain it? Then the incident remediation time, how long does it take in order to get business back flowing so you can sell that widget so that you can fulfill that passport? Other things might be what percentage of your environment to show a degree of success. But for me, the key is are the business needs being met in a secure fashion?
Okay. Tony?
It's a key area. I think, one of the things we've been looking at under our current initiative is our risk methodology and assessment. Of course, we follow, the risk management framework, but we've been looking very closely at how we implement it and how we can advance it so it helps to advance the business owners. Because again, it goes back to this idea of perception management, and that's part of the leadership, as Jyoti kind of went back to. But we are looking at how better to make consistent risk measurements across the department so that we can better enable authorizations that are used in one department to be used in other departments and better enable reciprocity, which is something we want to continue to do because we think it helps to streamline. So I'm measuring really looking, one of the areas is how quickly we can bring capability to business owners. So how do we approach actually understanding what the risk is? It's not that it's just that it has a vulnerability. It's what is the exploitability of that vulnerability and what is the impact if it is exploited? So we are starting to take more threat information in and using that intel, making sure our decisions are more data-driven versus what we feel and what we believe. Putting that in the context that across the department, we're kind of approaching it from the same perspective. We're looking at the second initiative we're doing is what we call cyber currency. How do we continuously understand what the risk is? And it's back to getting away from a compliance model where we're trying to tackle all of the cybersecurity control, trying to understand what the status of all the cybersecurity controls are, to understanding what are the core controls that we need to monitor on a near real-time basis. So for me, that's what we're moving in. That's the stage we're moving into in the Department of Navy. That's what I see as a CISO we need to be able to measure and how we deliver capability. And then last, I want to measure from an adversary's perspective. So I want more breach simulation in the department. I want more of more red teaming performed. So when I talk about measuring, I want not only to know that, yes, I put certain capability in place. Yes, I believe it's stigged to and it is securely configured, but now I need to test it on a more continuous basis. So we are a big advocate of putting more funding, more capability into doing these breach simulations so we can also take the actual adversary techniques and run it against our systems. So that's where I want to move more into that measurement area of understanding what we look like and what our capability, how it's actually performing.
All right. And Paul, I think one of the things that Tony implied and that we heard last night directly was that one approach to cyber, especially to zero trust, cannot necessarily apply to every single component in your organization. Just to continue with the Navy example, you don't do maintenance on a nuclear carrier the same way you do on a turbine-powered smaller ship and this kind of thing. Same thing with the ZTAs and the approaches. So maybe talk about, again, what are your measures of success, but also how do you make sure that you're not trying to put a same blanket over everyone, every component in labor?
Well, so I think in the cybersecurity world, especially in the federal government, we are so blessed because there's so many people who want to measure us all the time, right? There's all these FISMA reports and, how are you doing with multi-factor authentication? How are you doing with encryption? So we do measure a lot of things and we provide that data up. The thing that I like to do, and I think this goes to what Tony and Ty were saying, is that the more important ones are maybe that no one notices us, right? Which means that the business is running as it should and that there aren't any problems. So what we try to do, and we have a risk management approach from the departmental level. And I'm sure other departments do too. So we have a process where we build, and I'd say it's both from the bottom up and the top down, right? So we build from the bottom up by each component of Department of Labor being asked what their risks are. And I get an opportunity then to put into the mix what the cybersecurity risks are. They get rated on likelihood and impact. And this is across. So these are also things like the buildings crumbling down, right? You know, that's a risk that someone else is bringing up, or that we can't get the right number of mine inspectors. That's a risk that's in this mix. So they all get mixed together. And then the higher priority ones get bubbled up for the secretary and deputy secretary to continue. And these get put into the strategic plan then. And I'm not sure it's my sales job or CIO's sales job, or so we'll say maybe we're doing a good job with that. But cybersecurity risks do get highlighted in the strategic plan. And then these go, the priorities in the strategic plan start bubbling down. They get put into agency management plans with metrics in them. So this is where there's the metrics now being measured that are part of a departmental strategic plan. These aren't just my metrics. Now, these are metrics that apply to the entire Department of Labor about cybersecurity in particular in these cases. And they get the visibility that they're departmental priorities. And those have lots of components to them then that then trickle down into components to do the work, into employees' performance plans, into contractor SLAs, et cetera. So it's really building this, I think, coherent process where risk is articulated up, it's identified, it's then put into work plans. But again, it's all based on, if I just put in risk about, oh, well, we're going to be behind on patching, that's not going to make it into the report. I have to be able to say why this is important because it will impact the mission if it's not taken care of. So it's got to come down to mission.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, I can sense the devotion and passion, even though you're not talking loud, of this whole panel. So we thank you for that, because it does require that hard to define element above everything else. And, you know, Jyoti, when the pandemic hit, I think I had Francis Collins on the show. I said, what's going on? You have all these laboratories. Well, the only people going to work in the labs at NIH were the people that had to feed the animals, their rabbits and rats and chimps and so forth, that they had to keep alive, you know, for the experiments. Otherwise, everyone was remote. And now we're having this great national federal debate. There was just an executive order on that. I think you probably read about that. Nobody knows exactly what's going on. We had a 5,800 word memo from OMB on which nobody can understand. It's not understandable. Anyway, talk about cyber in the context of how the work patterns have changed with so many people teleworking and militant about continuing to telework.
Sure. Yeah. As you said, NIH is about 27 different institutes and centers, about 50,000 people, all doing various different types of things. We have researchers, clinicians, yoga teachers, doctors, nurses, technologists, administrative staff, police officers, all kinds of stakeholder groups. So it is very difficult to put one rule or one way of working for the entire community because everyone has different roles. So during the pandemic, it was very difficult, especially when from a CIT perspective, because we're responsible for enterprise technology and services for all of the NIH, but also several HHS optives, parts of the VA, and about 300,000 researchers around the world access our systems. So prior to the pandemic, there was this notion that telework just doesn't really work for the NIH in general, even for the technology rules. So you had to show up. I think we got one day of telework, and then suddenly COVID happened, or the pandemic started happening, and we were almost forced to figure out a way to enable the majority of us that can telework, the ability to telework. And we did a great job. Like we shifted immediately. We already had we started with Zoom and WebEx and all enterprise technologies that we already offered at a smaller scale, but now we had to shift to a larger scale and enable about 30,000 people that were able to telework to be able to access the technologies and systems that they needed to access remotely. And that really enabled everyone to not only share across NIH and other government agencies and the HHS, but also it enabled us to really figure out innovative ways to share across the world with our researchers that exist around the world that we weren't really able to do before in a fairly quick manner. And now that we're back somewhat, or we're starting to slowly come back in a more of a hybrid workplace setting, we're really starting to figure out what are some ways that we can leverage more purposeful on-site presence versus just coming in on-site just to check off the box that you showed up one day. And we're really trying to figure out like what do humans do well with that human interaction. And sometimes that is needed because some things can't be done virtually in a Zoom meeting with just 10 people just and staring at screens. Some things like innovation or brainstorming really does involve an on-site presence. So we're still in the process of figuring that out and looking at that human social interaction and how does that affect us?
And I think the rabbits really like the human bonding and the scratch between the ears once in a while, which you just can't get. So there's more people taking care of them too, right?
Yes.
Excellent. And Ty, the State Department, of course, is scattered already around the world, but
Yes.
now even within that context, people are remote to a great degree, not just Foggy Bottom, but I think some of the embassies and consulates throughout the world. So what effect has that had on your cyber plans and how do you deal with that long term?
Yes, great question. And as you just stated, we are geographically dispersed, embassies all over the world. So we were already functioning in a with the large capability of going remote quickly. We did not anticipate having to flip that switch so quickly. It was usually done with continuity of operation testing. We'll go remote and yep, everybody is able to connect. Well, that's okay if you need it for a short period of time, but then suddenly, just like your organizations, we were thrust into full remote overnight. And some of the challenges that we actually encountered, apparently it was easier when everyone is remote as opposed to when we got this pocket coming in and this pocket staying home. Someone's got to come in and make sure the laptops or the desktops are flipped on so they can get the patches, else everyone's coming in and they're sitting 2 hours while the Windows update comes through. Someone's got to make sure that the printers are still having ink and things of that nature. So just those type of minor things were challenging. One other that I think a lot of agencies probably took advantage of, that password reset that you get every 90 days or so, that was extended while you were fully remote because your help desk or your IT organizations didn't have the people in-house who could go through and help you out quickly. So those exception policies were extended, and now we're finding, oh, did we roll that back? Let's go check. And so I think a lot of organizations are also now going back and trying to right size their technology that was put in place in a rapid fashion. Yep.
Okay, and Tony, I had a question for you, getting back to that idea of the non-technical skills that are required in the cybersecurity area. And when you look at the recent breach from the Air National Guardsmen in Massachusetts, and we look back, I think it came up yesterday, the Edward Snowden affair and earlier breaches, these go way back, actually, the dropping paper bags in parks for cash to be replaced and all this kind of thing. And it strikes me, those are failures of the system and of the cybersecurity measures. But in my view, those are also failures of character on the fact of the people that committed these acts and are committing them to this day. How do you develop the kind of character needed in such sensitive type of work? I mean, this is the Navy's specialty, is developing character as much as technical skill to operate vessels and so forth. Maybe comment on that aspect of it.
Okay. I will. I just trying to figure out how Ty knew I had to go back to work to reset my password. But yeah, so so one terminal went down, and if you don't get to it within 3 weeks, you'll lose your account altogether. So, but I'll take care of that this afternoon. But to go back to character, you know, it's a touchy subject, you know, that I kind of, you know, we start talking about that particular issue, you know, we refer that back to DOD CIO, but thinking about leadership, thinking about character, what Jyoti was saying, I mean, it was really resonating listening to her talk about being vulnerable. I think when I first started in my role, of course, I'm retired military as well, you know, it was all about competence, displaying competence, being strong, displaying competence. And as I learned more along my career and started getting more in leadership roles and taking some really 360s where people may know, where you actually, people assess you from all different, you start learning how important vulnerability and being able to build relationships actually is. So I think the trying to, as you do your job and all the work you have to do as CISO, building relationships with people, establishing connections, that's what's going to give you some of the insight needed to understand where they are in their lives, right? Because those are where you start to understand the indicators that people may be having problems. Nothing's guaranteed when you talk about people. I'm sure you're sitting out there and you know that, but building relationships, continuing to connect, which goes back to your question about working remote. My team is great. Why? Because I had already established relationships. Most of my team members, I'm very fortunate, I have a low turnover, were pre-COVID relationships. So I was in the office with them all the time, right? So we already had the kidding, the jovial relationships. So when we transitioned to working remote, that was no problem. Zoom was okay. What you have to, my thought for you is, as you try to build and have new people coming into the environment now, and you're working remotely in cyber, you will have to take extra steps to build those relationships and understand people and know where they're at. One, you higher productivity, but two, back to understanding where they're at and what the challenges you have, and maybe you can help understand what they may be going through or what type of character they have in relationship, as we started to talk about protecting information, insider threat, and all these other type of things. So make sure you're working to build those relationships. Don't let Zoom be your only means of trying to connect with people. Remember that offsites and parties and social still have great places. And they're from a social perspective, but they're also part of team and people building, which goes back to how you build a strong team and understand character in the folks you're working with.
Josie, sure.
Can I say something controversial? So mic drop, can't drop this mic. So
You too can be pilloried on Reddit.
well, I just wanted to piggyback on what Tony was saying. You know, one of my other passions is also making sure all of us take care of our own mental health and well-being and wellness, because being a CISO, you know, the controversial part is there's a fine line when you don't take care of yourself and your own well-being. There's a fine line between being a positive cybersecurity person and an insider threat or a hacker. It all kind of like that part, it really, you know, the focus is on your own mental health. So if you're not able to lead well from within of yourself, and how are you going to be able to lead others, especially in the cyber field where you have access to a lot of information, data, systems, permissions, and you can really do a lot of damage if you don't take care of yourself in a holistic manner.
Anyone else on that? Because I want to go to the audience for questions. Otherwise, we're good. Do we have some hands? Come on, you're not going to get a panel this good very often.
Well, maybe while they're thinking about it, I have a few thoughts about the sort of, you know, the risks and outcomes of the pandemic and remote work. And you know, some of the panelists were talking about, you know, the opportunities to bring people together. And I think that is important. If if there's a meaningful reason to do that, right? Let's bring people together for blank. But at least in the Department of Labor, one of the benefits that came out of this remote work is we learned, like a lot of other people that we actually can do our work remotely for the most part, which allowed us then to recruit nationally. It really helped us with our recruitment and retention, that we could, we didn't have to say, well, you have to work within 50 miles of, Washington, DC to work at the Department of Labor. Now we've got people in Colorado, we have people in Kansas that work for the OCIO. I have a vulnerability assessor who's from Puerto Rico, lives in Puerto Rico. Guess what? They're not going to drop into the office for a after work party, right? So with that being said, it's something maybe you were talking about, Jyoti, is that we need to find ways, though, in this new environment to make them feel like part of the team when they can't be there in person. I don't know how to do that, but I think we all need to be looking for those newer ways and opportunities that we can't be physically with these people to engage with them in a very personal way, so that they don't feel left out. So there's some of that, but also that they, Tony, as you were saying, that you get to know them better, right? And you understand what their motivations are and their goals are and things like that. So, thinking that people in Kansas and Colorado and Puerto Rico are going to move to Washington, DC area is naive, right? If anyone thinks that's going to happen, that's not going to happen. And certainly some of this, this talk right now about, well, there's going to be a return to work. I think that causes some concern with employees, and I hope that gets ironed out quick as to what that means.
Well, we have remote printers that can send people documents. Now we have 3D printers that can make parts. I think for that social aspect, what we need are cocktail printers that you load in your gin, your rum, and then you can send someone a file to make a great martini, and they can join that after work office party. We do have a question right over here.
I will say that I was Scott Tasley with IT Cadre. I will say that there were several times during the COVID period when we did virtual cocktail hours, and sometimes those are actually worthwhile.
Until someone drops out of view from the camera and you hope they're still there.
Balance and all good things, of course. I was an Army engineer officer for 20 years, and a good friend of mine that's still with the Corps wrote a paper recently talking about the challenges of balancing investments and focus on near-term efficiencies, things that are very likely to happen, but may or may not be the more dangerous things that are far less likely to happen, but you have to think about them. In your roles, how do you balance the more likely near-term versus the maybe not so likely, but could be more dangerous other things? Because it came up in questions this morning about resilience and cyber resilience and how to think about that.
When we're seeing black swans almost every month nowadays.
Gray swans, things that in hindsight, you go, why the heck didn't I, blah, blah, blah.
All right, great question. Anybody? Tony?
I get, for me, it's stepping back into that really understanding what my attack surface looks like, right? Because at any given time, I have pages and pages and pages of vulnerabilities. We have ships of areas, we have ships that are, 20 plus years old, right? And ships, we based on ship avails, you bring ships in, you do maintenance on ships, you change out parts, but this does not occur very often. There are different maintenance that you can do on an ongoing basis, and there are times where racks and hardware actually have to be replaced. And then there are acquisition cycles that you have to deal with, and there are funding cycles. So it is not a matter that we upgrade, modify, and change things just on the fly. So these things have to be planned out. So what I have to have is a priorities. I have to have a strategy that helps me able to understand what needs to be done first. Where do I stand? How do I make those risk decisions? So it goes back to me understanding what is actually exploitable and what the impact is. And that plays very heavily into me how I work with CFOs, work with the different PEOs and program offices to address and tackle risk, because I ask that same questions and what they're upgrading, what they're proposed to upgrade, and when. And then one more comment, were you talking about COVID and pre-COVID? Again, there's always challenges and there's always opportunities. And I must say that there were a lot of opportunities the Department of Navy took when we had to deal with COVID. We really modernized a lot of networks, where we had a lot of technical debt, and it was an opportunity where we had to strike the balance between upgrading boundaries and infrastructure to actually enable cloud transition, as well as moving to cloud-based software as a service, which is overall, looking back, may have not been that priority you were talking about at first. It's more incremental, but when we made that leap and accelerated, now we're looking at a much more better picture of understanding what's happening on our networks, what's connected to our network, what the cyber hygiene is of those IT assets, and near-term awareness when there's an indicator of compromise. So again, it was a change which was accelerated by a challenge, but we've been able to really make it opportunity. And I think we're really leaning forward within DoD now when we start talking about understanding what the security posture is of our networks.
Yeah, it's a good point. The rest of the panelists have the regular federal budget cycle. You've got program planning, budget, and execution to get things through, and that can be a much more difficult process. Hopefully that'll get fixed. Okay, one more comment and then we got to wrap up. Anyone else on the gray swan question?
Sure. Let me piggyback off of what Tony was talking about with the attack surface. I thought that was a great thing to point out. Understanding your attack surface, what can be exploited, what is going to be that impact if it is exploited, and being able to take that messaging up to other executives throughout your organization. So again, being that executive influencer, are you able to influence the right people to provide the right amount of funding, influence HR to assist with some additional recruiting? I heard a quote recently that's really stuck with me, and it is, control doesn't scale well, but influence does. So you don't want to control the situation. You want to be able to influence your up chain and your down chain, your sides. So that's one thing that I personally am working on, is being a better executive influencer.
All right, good note to end on. Let's thank this fabulous panel. Round of applause. And you have been a great audience. We have one more action-packed panel to wind up our day, and I'm going to invite up the leadership consultant for ATARC herself, Kirsten Patton, to handle that panel. Kirsten, come on up.
Okay, I'd like to go ahead and invite up my panelists. So Donald, Frank, David, and Landon, please come to the front and take a seat. Hi. Don, nice to meet you. Hi there. Good, how are you doing? Good to see you. Hey, I didn't realize earlier you got that.
I'm here.
Here you go. Long time no see. All right, thank you, gentlemen. So to kick things off, I'm going to have you all introduce yourselves just briefly, your name, your role at your agency, and what's been your favorite thing about attending GITEC so far. So we'll start at the end and come this way with Don.
My name is Don Yeske. I'm the Acting Chief Technology Officer for the Department of the Navy. Little known fact, and I'll just get it out of the way up front. The Department of the Navy includes two services, a Navy and a Marine Corps. Marines don't like it when we forget that. So let me just get that out of the way here. I think my favorite thing about events like this is listening to what other people have to say about the challenges we share and learning from other people who are like-minded and facing down those same threats.
Ditto. No. I'm Landon Van Dyke with the State Department. I'm the CTO for the Office of Management Strategies and Solutions. So we are the arm to the Undersecretary for Management, who many times gets lots of problems thrown at him or her, and my office gets called in to try to come up with a solution. Obviously, as the CTO part, my job is to figure out what technology we should be applying, how it applies across the enterprise itself. But many times it's actually a process improvement, has really nothing to do with technology. One of my favorite parts, of course, is very similar, meeting everybody, hearing what's going on. Sometimes it's self-reassuring that, it's not I'm not the only one with this problem. And it's also kind of cool to talk to the tech people out there to kind of see what new solutions are around the block.
Dave Larimore, I am the CTO for the Department of Homeland Security, for all of the Department of Homeland Security. But I do also, as part of my role, oversee and have a more tactical side when it comes to the management component, which is enterprise programs. So my role has several pieces to it. First and foremost, I provide governance and oversight for acquisition programs, which accounts for approximately $10 billion of IT spend. I am in charge of the technical strategy and direction for the Department of Homeland Security. And I also run several special projects for topic areas like Agile, cloud, AI, which has been a big one, zero trust, et cetera. I am excited to be here today as a introvert and someone who generally spends most of his days with his two dogs in the basement. It is nice to actually see some of these friendly faces that I've known for years. So I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Hey, everybody. I'm Frank Indiviglio. I'm the CTO for the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. That's a mouthful, so we'll just stick with NOAA from here on out. So my job is to help NOAA bring in technology to support its mission. So we have our mission space is pretty wide. It goes from the surface of the sun to the bottom of the ocean, and there's a lot of technology that supports all the observations and forecasts that happen in that space. So I would say it's the most fun job in government. I'm a little biased. That's okay. So that's kind of a nutshell. And what makes you glad to be here? Obviously, I think everyone said it, seeing everybody in person, people who have only seen on a screen up until this morning. And really, I think these kinds of events or these kinds of things, which were kind of normal a couple of years ago, are now special. And it's actually nice to have an event where it has some additional meanings. There you go. Thank you.
And the podcast we just recorded, right?
And the podcast we just recorded. Of
AI
course.
proficiency. So I'm going to start with Dawn again, but we don't need to necessarily go in any particular order. Dawn, if you could kick us off with the first question. I want to know, in what ways has the role of CTOs in government evolved in response to new challenges and concerns that have arisen from the COVID-19 pandemic?
Sure. Tony spoke about this in the last panel. I'll emphasize some of his comments and add some of my own thoughts. So in 2019 and early 2020, as we were kind of looking at what we intended to do in the Navy and the Marine Corps, we had something that was like a 5 or 6 year plan to get to something called NEO 365, which I was a user of, actually an early user of, and I will tell you, as a user, was patently terrible. It was god awful. You literally couldn't do anything. It would take minutes to log in. You had something like OneDrive, but it didn't really work. You could only access it from your government furnished equipment. And even then, none of us were in the office at the beginning of COVID. And so we had to go make improvements to our enterprise networks in order to allow, within the Department of the Navy, 750,000 to 1 million people to actually go home and work from home. That involved changes to our boundary infrastructure, changes to our core networking technologies, improvements in VPN. But the big change that we made was embracing the challenge to bring forward new technology faster. Who remembers CVR, Commercial Virtual Remote? It was really cool, right? You could use it from your own devices. You could use it from home. It was on all the time. It's easy to use. It tracked with technology. That's what we wanted. But we wanted it in a way that we were commanding and controlling. not in a way that Microsoft was doing that for us. So we learned a lot from CVR, and we developed something called Flank Speed. Flank Speed is not just Office 365. Flank Speed is our enterprise services that deliver secure collaboration and communication, core technologies, regardless of where you sit, at your home, in your office, in someone else's space, using networks of convenience and devices you might own or the government might own that are managed in all possible ways. So bringing that to life was a bumpy road. It was terrible. If you were an early user of Flank Speed like I was, it was pretty terrible at first. If you don't know, the name Flank Speed actually comes from the fastest speed that a ship can go, which is, by the way, by definition, not a safe speed to continue to operate a ship. Like, it's, when you say a ship is going flank speed, what you mean is we threw the throttle as far forward as we possibly could. The turbines are spinning as fast as they possibly can and might snap if we keep doing this. And if we're doing it into waves and, you know, like, bad things are going to happen. Bad things kind of did happen at the beginning of Flank Speed, but you know what? We learned fast, we recovered fast, and we learned how to deliver technology sooner. That's probably the biggest takeaway from Flank Speed. Yeah, we made a bunch of improvements to how we command and control ourselves and what we can see on our own networks and everywhere else. But the big thing that changed and continues to change as a result of Flank Speed is how we manage, how we deliver new technologies, how we consume and deliver those things.
Thank you. Who would like to jump in next?
Just kind of add to that, you know, for the State Department in particular, very similar. COVID did force us to look at remote access and all of that. However, just the role of CTO, I'd say in the last, you know, if you look at the last 20 years, in the last 5, you really have seen a huge change in what the demand is from our customers within our organization, right? So for the last 15 years prior to that, we could technically just roll out what we wanted because we were the technologist and we were like, this is what you're going to get and this is what you're going to have. And people kind of got in line and said, okay, this sucks, but this is what I have to use. Because the technology is so readily available to people at home and the next generation is so familiar with it, the demand from them is huge. You know, so when we said, yes, COVID's here, everybody said there's a remote technology, we should be able to have it, it should be available readily and make it work because they've all seen it. And so for us, the expectation on what we can deliver has gone up tremendously over the last 5 years, right? With cloud computing and remote access and all of the cybersecurity concerns, it makes it even more challenging for a CTO to kind of look at the landscape and say, how do I deliver to this large demand and at the same time maintain our core competency on security and making sure the mission gets done. So I would just say that, yeah, the role has changed because our customers have changed in the last, you know, half decade or so.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So from the DHS perspective, when COVID first came around, we went from an organization having to serve a couple hundred people a day from a remote perspective to 10,000 people a day. So fortunately, people have been teleworking for a while, right? But it was never telework first. It was always kind of, you know, you're in the office first. So we need to make sure that the technology, the experience, the availability of tools, how you authenticate is predominantly designed around a in-person, in-office environment, and COVID caused us to flip that on its head. So, you know, we shifted from a, you know, in-person office first to a remote first, which was great because we were already heading down that path. It was from a employee perspective incredible because now we not only have a culture and environment that accepts and promotes telework, but it now allows us to look at hiring outside of the Beltway. It allows us to look at the rest of the country as opportunity to be able to recruit great talent. Once we got into a remote first atmosphere, we started looking at how did COVID affect our customers. So we're starting to see the same thing, and we are now leaving the mode where we're trying to figure out how we operate and how we as the department are more effective in a remote environment. We're also looking at how our customers can be more effective and how we serve our customers where they are at. So when we talk about how my role has shifted, it is shifting away from kind of the traditional, agile cloud DevOps and wearing Jedi outfits at conferences like these, and focusing more on how do we start leveraging technology to provide a better customer experience? How do we reduce the burden on the general public? How do we look at the technologies that are getting used for industry around things like biometrics and identity verification and identity proofing, and how do we apply those here? How do we look at the government and the experience of a citizen across the entire landscape of the federal government? Because when you're dealing with Department of Homeland Security, you could also be dealing with the Department of State. You could also be dealing with Social Security Administration. You can also be dealing with Health and Human Services. I think there's people from all over the place here today. Like, believe it or not, a single US citizen will deal with potentially one, if not all of those agencies, and they all have different experiences. So looking at how our customers are interacting with our peers and partners in other departments has also been a huge change in my role, and one of my focuses in figuring out how to connect the dots and make compromises in some way to provide a better experience for our customers.
Good, right?
Yep. All right. So I don't know if I'll be that dissimilar to what was been said already. I guess from my perspective, use a bad sports metaphor, which you'll learn I do all the time. We've become almost more like player managers, right? Before we were in the management role, kind of along the lines of what Landon was talking about, where we're dictating kind of solutions, or not dictating, but working through solutions and sending them out. I think we have to now, having proved that we can rapidly adopt technology quickly, right, through COVID, has changed the perspective, right? How do we deliver services? How quickly can we do that? And part of that is understanding what your teams are doing, what your customers are doing, and have an intimate understanding of that. So giving those two kind of pushes, I think we've moved from purely a management function or purely a wizard of technology, as some folks put it, but it's more of a how are we going to develop a solution together based on your needs, right? My customers are pretty advanced now. They are bringing in tools by themselves. They use tools at home. How do we bring that into the fold so that they can have a user experience that they want rather than what we can give them? And the other side of it too is now that we have a lot of complicated tools out there, right? People, ChatGPT is I think what most of us have been talking about for the last month. In terms of a policy and technology, but it's a very complicated landscape, right? Not just how you use it, what you put into it, what you get out of it, what are the implications, and really understanding that from the technology side, but also understanding that from the mission side and educating folks is important. So I think it's now part of their job, and it's not just a technology, it's education and all along the lines of delivering experience that the customers want rather than what you can provide for them.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your insights on that. Before I continue with my questions, are there any questions from our audience? All right. So let's start with Landon first on this one. I would like to ask you, what are some strategies that you think CTOs can use to manage the increasing demand for IT professionals and help to build a strong and sustainable workforce?
One of the strategies I would deploy, and I do deploy, is I'm not always looking for an IT professional. I'm looking for a person who could become an IT professional. Many people that I used to be one of them with my Texas Instrument back in the basement, back in the day. You'd go down to the bookstore, you'd grab your code book, you'd come back home. I want to play Hunt the Wumpus or whatever. I'd have to type in the entire code, and I'd spend all afternoon doing that so I could play a game for like an hour and then hope that I could record it with my tape recorder. So I didn't have to do it the next day. Wonderful personalities. They love technology, and there's definitely a place for them within our larger ecosystem. But I also need people, because the demand has changed from our customer. I need people that understand how to engage our larger customer base and understand what their mission is. And sometimes a coder or a technologist of that nature is not going to be the person you want to put in front of those people. And so I have to find people that have a little bit of, curiosity. They really want to learn about technology, but at the same time, they bring a different attribute to the larger professional workforce. That said, obviously, because of remote, we can employ, and I actually have one of my employees, one of my best cloud engineers, works out of Alaska, and so it's great because I can keep him, I can ask him questions at 9 o'clock and still expect that he's still going to be around and available. There were times where we were working with Microsoft, actually, where in the early days of the Azure cloud for government, we would be like, hey, we need a cloud engineer, and Microsoft was able to provide, cloud engineer support, but many of them were like in China. And we were like, well, we might not want to have this particular workforce, I'm sure they're great, working on our government cloud activities, even though it was at 1 o'clock in the morning and they were the only ones around. So recognizing that we do have a global mission, we are looking for, and one of our strategies is looking for people that are remote, that are around the world, but are able to work on things that we want them to work on 24/7. And then the last panel touched on this about creating that camaraderie, creating that team, and making people really want to be part of that mission has always been something that I think all good leaders do anyway. But yeah, we have all of my engineers that were pre-COVID are post-COVID. Many of them have been offered 7 figures to go do something very similar to what they do for us, but they want to stay with the mission because they believe in the mission, they believe in the team, they like the dynamic that we have, and being able to create that for your workforce is essential to bring that right mix together.
Thank you. Who else would like to jump in and share?
Go ahead. Okay.
Go for it, Frank.
So I think I'll pick up where we just left off. Mission, right? Mission is the most important thing. It's the reason most of us are here. And it is, I think from employment, from a workforce perspective, it is the sales pitch that every agency has. But that being said, I think, to develop the folks that you need or keep retain and keep a supply of the folks that you need to really work with your partners. So working at a science agency, right? We have a lot of tight relationships with universities, with other entities outside that do research. And I think that's where, either the community needs to work together or you as an agency need to work really hard on developing pathways for folks, right? So I think Landon said it as well, like we don't necessarily need IT people or computer scientists, but we need folks that may understand, the computer science or the social science and communicating both the science, the support, all of those things. So I've focused on building kind of relationships with those universities so that we can build relationship with their students, so that we can have a pipeline of, people who are interested in NOAA's mission, people who are interested in internships, fellowships, postdocs, whatever that may be, so that they can come in and see the mission. They can try it out and understand what we do. And it helps them because they're developing their skills, but if we can entice them to stay, that's what we want to do. So it really is it's an outreach program and you need to keep that going. And it's got to broaden out from, traditionally we worked at IT or CS. Now it's got to include social science, everything else, right? So you got to be more encompassing as well.
Yeah. David, do you have anything to add?
Yeah. So 2 things. First and foremost, I think the big shift or big change with the increase of professionals is we are starting to focus on bringing people in for the technical first and then training them how to be good government. And what I mean by that is if you look by and large at the IT organizations, which are evolving, predominantly you're looking at what we call 343s or project and program managers that are in charge of IT projects. And if I could tell you how many times I've been in rooms where managers of large IT programs, kick off their talk with I'm just a simple farmer from Georgia, or when we used to build helicopters in the Marines, it would be like this, and not a single person was like, yeah, I did app integration on Google or Facebook or Twitter or whatever else. It's I used to build chips, and that's the basis that I'm coming from here. And we're starting to realize that they don't necessarily translate well to modern software development, doesn't lend itself well to being able to modernize in place, to government as the integrator. So we're starting to implement different hiring authorities and different ways to attract talent. So we've got our CTMS, Cyber Talent Management System, which is heavily focused on, hey, come in here, show us your technical prowess, your technical skills. Not only are we going to empower you to use those technical skills, we are going to have that technical skill and that pillar of yours help you grow financially and help you grow inside of our organization. The second side of things is secondary skills. And this is kind of my personal agenda here at DHS. And that is, we're always going to have the need for project and program managers. We're always going to have the need for, system engineers and cyber folks and DBAs. But you're not going to see just a huge swath of people that are DevOps engineers and specific cyber implementation experts and zero trust experts and cloud experts. And you're never going to have a perfect scenario where a single DHS program has a single expert in all of these areas. What you're going to have is you're going to have a lot of people who are predominantly focused on a single area, but have good, strong secondary skills in areas that are interesting to them, that are passion projects to them. So a big thing for me is, how do we identify those secondary skills? How do we build communities around those secondary skills? And how do we provide training opportunities and growth opportunities and practical, technical opportunities for them to be able to grow with these skills?
Thank you. Don?
Let me just say, I love going last. Let's do that again, because I was taking notes as everyone was speaking, and don't disagree with anything. We have folks. There's a member of my team who lives and works full time in Puerto Rico. Most people don't know that or don't notice that. And that's the virtue of how we've grown, right, across COVID and, over the last few years, as we've made significant advances in how we deliver technology. You mentioned CTMS, thank you. So I didn't have to. I think DHS is leading the way there with regard to paying people what they're actually worth. And DoD seeks to be a fast follower in many regards. There are only two programs, for those who don't know, there are only two programs like that in the whole of the federal government: CTMS at DHS and the cybersecurity workforce at DoD. So we're doing what we can to pay people what they're actually worth, or as close as we can get to it. And that's hugely important. The one thing I would add to what you've all offered is we've got to reduce our dependence on people in every way that we possibly can, right? So we go throughout our day doing the things that we're tasked to do, and too often we don't question why it is that we have to spend human hours on doing those things, right? So within the Department of the Navy, our core technology strategy is the capstone design concept for information superiority. It demands that we measure two things: customer experience and operational resilience. We think those things work in concert and not at odds with one another. If I can improve your customer experience, often I can do that by improving the resilience of my product, right? And conversely, if I improve the resilience of the product or the service, I am improving your customer experience. So when I say that, what I'm suggesting, and I'll be overt about the suggestion, is where we can automate things out of the way, we absolutely have to. There are things that we do in the fields in which we all work that don't demand humans anymore, and yet we use humans to do those things. And that is asking people whose mission motivates them to come to work to do something other than contributing as directly as possible to that mission. So let's seek to, leverage technology in order to better use human skills.
Thank you. I'm going to open it up to audience questions. Tom?
I actually have one. How has the black swan or gray swan, or whatever we want to call it, ChatGPT affected you all in the everyday discussions as a CTO?
Anybody want to jump on that grenade?
Looks like Landon does.
No. I'm happy to go first and then add what you see fit.
I'll jump on whatever remains.
Okay, all right. So in answering that question, I think we have to have some shared terms of reference. Let's talk about what AI is. And we can think of AI in three broad waves, right? The first wave being expert knowledge, right? The codification of what experts know, like along the lines of, and by the way, I'm borrowing 100% of this from other agencies, just to be clear. First wave is like, the codification of expert knowledge. So think about like TurboTax, right? It's been around for 20 years, definitely proven, does great things. Second wave AI, you can think of that as machine learning at scale, right? So learning from large data sources that are curated, that can train a machine learning algorithm to do a specific job, recognizing a driver's license number or a social security number, picking out important records from unimportant ones, major changes from minor ones. We use both of those things all day, every day in the work that we do. When we talk about ChatGPT, that's a third wave of AI. And it is, these large language models and backing them with a generative platform. So we're no longer asking to find things that we already had. We're asking for new content. That's new. That's fundamentally new. There's a reasonable definition of the term AI, which goes like this. AI is that which we don't understand yet. We call it AI when we haven't yet matured it to the point where we can actually use it at scale and in meaningful ways. So we still call that third wave, like that generative AI, the large language models, we're still calling it AI because, broadly speaking, we haven't really proven it out yet. I think we have to separate that from, the applications of artificial intelligence that have come in previous waves, because we're using the hell out of those things to great effect, right? We're using them to secure our networks. We're using them to do our jobs, and they're proven and viable, right? Commercial enterprises use them all the time, right? Google's Exhibit A among, all of those things. With regard to generative AI within the Department of the Navy, there are obvious applications that we would like to explore, and we're in the process of exploring. One example of that is generating code. So the Marine Corps recently created something called the Marine Corps Software Factory, where we're sending Marines into classes of soldiers down at the Army Software Factory in Texas. The purpose of doing that is to democratize development to the point where it can be done as close to the tactical edge as possible. Generative AI also allows us the opportunity to democratize development, but in a different way, turning people who speak English into developers. It's a well-known, well-understood, somewhat demonstrated capability of ChatGPT to generate actual working code, not perfect code, right? It still requires humans to go over that code and integrate it. And, right now today, we can't just ask ChatGPT to build a whole suite of applications for us, but we can get working code out of it. And we can use it to identify problems in code we already have. And, those are important applications. So as we're developing the human side of it, I think we have to think of programming going forward as like everything else, like targeting, right? Like the most important things that we do, putting iron on target. We have to think of that as a task, not just for a human, but for a human machine team, right? Our tasks that we do that are the most important tasks that we do are tasks that we do as human machine teams. That means the data has got to be accessible to the human and the non-person entity at the same time with the same fidelity, so that we're not doing all of our integration in gray matter as we're commanding and controlling things. We're actually leveraging machines for what they do well, right? Pointing us at things that we got to pay greater attention to that are now hiding in the noise. Second.
I second that. In particular for Chat GPT, actually about a year ago, we were already playing around with the coding version, right? Where it recognized what coding language you were using. If it was JavaScript, it would go back through the library of open source library, library for JavaScript, and be able to say, yeah, it looks like you're trying to create a script that does temperature. This library already exists. Would you like me to drop that into, as a function for your code? Great stuff. Sometimes created things that were a little loopy, and I mean that in the literal sense. But for the most part, we were like, okay, that was pretty impressive. However, what it did, we did recognize that it would go out to the internet and come back with something. And from a security perspective, if let's say our agency, which our value is in information, if we are let's say looking to try to sanction somebody as a federal government, and I'm using Chat GPT to write up a dossier on an individual, which we're about to go and sanction, that bot is going off to the internet to find everything they can about this individual, which if you know who we are or who that bot's related to, you kind of get a sense the US government might be doing something for this individual, and that person can get a heads up, right? That's just a brief concept. But the idea is you now have essentially a query that has been established in English as noted, rather than in a SQL format or whatnot. That's basically saying, I'd like to do this. Help me get information to do this. And that information now is being broadly used for creating all these reports. That's more of a concern for us. Just looking at, hey, how do we prevent people from understanding fully, when it needs to be obscure, what we're up to, right? So the query, which the bot is carrying, is a concern for us, or it's, there's solutions, but it is something that we're considering. We have actually looked at using Chat GPT on our AI workbench internally, where it has access to all of our data, not all of it, and is able to basically create SQL queries. We're happy to see how it's working in a controlled environment like that. But when you give it out to something like the larger internet, it becomes more of a challenge for us. So it's one of the things we're looking at.
Thank you. Did either of you want to add anything?
I mean, I just wanted to say that, ChatGPT is a large language model chatbot developed by OpenAI. It's capable of generating realistic and coherent chat conversations. And the role of a CTO has been affected by ChatGPT in a number of ways. First, ChatGPT can be used to automate tasks that were previously done by CTOs, such as responding to customer inquiries and providing technical support. And this frees up CTOs to focus on more strategic and high-level tasks. Now, the ironic thing is I use Google Bard to come up with that answer. But I mean, it was a good start. Like, it was human readable and understandable and pretty damn close to what we've been saying up here in this area. And so that's essentially how we're looking at it, right? When you look at the benefit of a large language model, it predominantly is dependent, the answers, the context, the information, the accuracy is dependent upon the data you're pulling it from. So, we at DHS are looking at kind of, what is DHS GPT? Like if you look at the DHS data, how can we leverage that to provide a better customer experience? How can we do that to assist when it comes to disaster response? How can we do that when it relates to the immigration life cycle? So it's all heavily theoretical. In a lot of ways, it is a solution in search of a problem. And we are experimenting and we're looking at it and we're trying to figure out, like, hey, let's answer a question and then let's have, a generative AI answer the question. And we're starting to find out that they're always pretty close. There's some hallucinations here on the ChatGPT side, but at the end of the day, it has been serving as a great start. It serves as a great start for speaking engagement. It serves as a great start for engaging with public, engaging with citizens, engaging with our own employees, et cetera, et cetera. So it is really helping us understand how to communicate with people just as much as it's helping us get answers to our own questions.
And we're along the same lines. I think the things that we focus on are educating people on the tools that are out there now, their limitations, what you're putting on in the public domain. We mentioned that. It's an augment, it's never going to replace a forecaster, but it'll certainly augment one. And I think the most important thing, and this now we're getting to the theoretical, because these things communicate in ways like we just demonstrated here on stage, it becomes an important tool to communicate with your stakeholders, right? So convincing someone to leave their house because a hurricane is coming or whatever natural disaster is a challenge. It'll be a challenge in the future, but the more tools that we can put in front of that forecaster to make someone understand the danger that they're in and that they need to do something is important. And I think that's part of the real benefits that we'll see it or hope to see it. But anyway.
Any other audience questions? You look like you've got a question. Okay.
So I want to take the same question.
Hang on, we got some people online, so if you can speak in the mic.
I want to take that question and flip it around to the human, right? So I think Bill Gates came out and said he's seen 2 life-changing human parts come out of technology. The first was the GUI, and the second is large language modeling and ChatGPT type interfaces. So if you were to look at this not as changing the way that technology works under the hood, because it really isn't, it's just the large language vertical is just a much larger pot of gold than we had to work from before. And you look at it as changing the fundamental way that we can interact as humans with the technology. Where do you see that? And I'll give you a perfect example, right? I feel like Marty McFly. Every time I go to work in the government, I go back to the future, right? And I get to experience what I felt like as a kid in the 90s going and interacting with technology in most cases. I would love to not have to do that. So if you guys are Doc Brown and thinking in terms of how you're looking at leveling the playing field with some of this, like large language models, how are you thinking through that problem at scale?
I'm sorry, could you clarify that last part one more time? Sorry,
Sure.
You had me.
If I'm at home and I want to watch something on the TV, I can usually speak into something, it streams, right? Something's wrong with the stream. Usually I can check my internet. If something's wrong with the internet, I can call a service provider and get it fixed. If I try to do that same thing at work today, if I try to have that same ability, that user experience, it is completely different. And it takes me back 20 years in the user experience to what we dealt with dial-up computers. My heart still drops when the phone rings and I'm on the internet. So I'm just coming at it from that perspective. How are we getting it to where people can have an expectation of service and also the keep up with the times for interface with technology?
So we played around with this pre-COVID with Alexa. We were like, okay, if someone's going to want to come in and have an Alexa in the office, and they're going to want to say, Alexa, what happened to my network last night? Tell me what security breaches we have. And, they expect it to say, hey, you updated this many computers, 5 of them failed, and, all of that. And the suspicion was, of course, Alexa's listening to us. And then we're like, okay, how much is Alexa listening to us? That's really what the question was to our security folks. We said, let's just hook up Alexa to a really good monitoring firewall and tell me how much is actually going out every time I ask Alexa something and how much comes back in. And then throughout the day, just leave it alone and see how much is going in and out when nobody's talking. And so we were already doing that type of testing to just see what would happen. What we ultimately came to the conclusion was that Alexa is going back to the cloud using this larger library of language to understand what you said and come back with a solution. And for us, back to almost the same point I was talking about with ChatGPT, for us to start asking random questions about a particular case, that part would actually end up in somebody's search engine. Whoever owns Alexa or whatever we were using, they would end up acquiring all of this information that we were asking. And daily things like, hey, what happened to my cybersecurity? Not a problem. Going back to, what's going on with this individual? Tell me about all their finances. That becomes more of a problem, right? So for us, we were just trying to figure out how we could split off
that ability. And ultimately, we came to the conclusion that we would have to work with one of the libraries that have these languages, whether it's Amazon or whomever, and say, we would like to have your engine within our boundary for particular questions that we would want to be able to ask. But we have looked into it, and there's other solutions that are coming up every day with all of the technology. So we're hoping that at some point it won't be a problem. But that is that's one of the things that we kept coming back to when we're looking at that. All true, all true. For those who don't know, the young lieutenant commander who asked that question, he's the chief data officer at one of our program executive offices in the Navy, and does fantastic work. And I think it's a searing question for me as the CTO for the Department of the Navy, because what you're really asking is, how is technology going to make my life better? Damn it, right? Let me say that making your life better is primarily a human problem, but technology can help. Here's where we're helping with the human problem. We measure what we value. And when I mentioned customer experience and operational resilience earlier, it was because that's what we've directed out of the Department of Navy CIO. That's what we directed every single program in the Department of the Navy to measure. What is your customer experience and how do you know? How resilient are your products, services, and solutions? And how do you know? And we want that measured first. Now, technology provides us tools to potentially make those things better, right? So generative AI, right? Applications of generative AI may include ways to allow your customers, your end users, sailors, right? To actually interact with the technologies we're bringing to bear in better, more positive ways. And you yourself and me, myself, as users of that technology, right? So I would love to get to a point. I would love to get to a point where rather than you having to dig through, mountainous libraries of things in order to find solutions that maybe already exist, that we bring those solutions forward to you, right? I would love to get to a point where rather than forcing you to troubleshoot what's wrong with the system on a ship, the ship troubleshoots it for you and says, hey, go replace this failing module, right? And that infinitely amplifies sailor self-sufficiency, right? And I want to drive you and people in your line of work to take those technologies and bring them to bear in creative ways, because we're going to measure what we value. We're going to measure customer experience and operational resilience. If we can find ways collectively to improve those metrics using any technology, not just this one, we're all about it. I want to hear those ideas. I want to amplify the best ones, and I want to drive investment toward them. So you're right. We have sucked for a very, very long time, and we're trying to get better. And I just want to go on record saying we're trying to get better. I read the searing nature of that question as directed toward me, and I accept it. And I'm doing what I can to change the equation for you, and I need your help to do that. And thank you for providing it.
All right, I think we are just about out of time, so I'm going to welcome Tom back up. Thank you all so much for the panel discussion. Thank you for the questions. Tom, over to you.
Okay, bear with us for just one more minute before you get on your way. Thank you very much. Excellent panel, great discussion of the AI question. This came to mind this morning. I'm reading a very old paperback. The paperback version came out in about 1970. You can see this has been read a lot, but it's a book called With God and Russia by Walter Cichek, if anyone remembers that name. This book came out in 1964, his autobiography. He was a Jesuit priest who was captured working in Russia on behalf of the church, and was captured and put into the Gulag in the Stalin era, did not escape the Soviet Union and land at Idlewild Airport until 1963, when the Kennedy administration and some work that had begun in the Eisenhower administration got him out. Amazingly, we're still here with Americans, Paul Whelan and some of the others, being held at this moment in the Soviet Union. So I want to thank our public servants for the work that they do, not only for their mission, not only for the safety of the United States, but for our essential liberty, because that is a very important thing that we have that is not a given in this world or on this planet. So let's give a round to our feds that are here today for the important work you do. Thanks to Tom Suter, thanks to the sponsors of this conference, the ATARC fabulous staff, second to none. Thank you for being a great audience. Be sure to check out all of the videos on the ATARC YouTube channel and fill out the survey for this event so we can help keep tailoring it for years ahead. God willing, we'll see you before then, but definitely next year, ATARC GITEC 2024. Thank you all very much. Tom Suter.
Yep. And just in closing, I want to thank Tom for guiding us through this last couple of days. You've done a fantastic job, my friend.
Thank you.
You're the best ever.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I gotta make it through Plain County.
Oh.